one. Hello, everyone, and welcome to VAC Roundtable number 97. And this one, we got a special one cooked up for you. We're very fortunate to have another veteran with us. Wasn't aware that he was a veteran until recently, and had to reach out to him and have him join us. We're joined today by Kevin Jodrey, also known as Ganjier Zero, as well as a breeder cultivar and a coastie. And yeah, we let's see, Amber, of course, is another one of our members who's a coastie, so we don't have that many Coast Guardies out, but mad respect to all those who have served, and thank you for joining us tonight, Kevin.
Thank you for having me on. And yeah, no, it's a pleasure. The being a veteran is controversial these days, but the work that we did in the positive aspects was really something special.
Right on. And we're going to get into that pretty early and often. But our first question is a multi-tiered one. It's how did you originally come to cannabis? So initially, how did you first hear about cannabis, if you can remember that far back? And then when did you try it? And when did you decide it was going to become your life's work?
You know, I was in a neighborhood that was filled with drug traffickers, so I had heard about it probably since I was 9 or 10 years old. Got exposed to it first time 12, somewhere between sixth grade and seventh grade, and I enjoyed it. It gave me an escape, and at that time, that was kind of critical. I needed something to kind of transcend where I was, and but it was basically at that level, and I was fortunate that I get to be around a lot of traffickers, which seems odd to some people, but it gave me an incredible exposure to the world of cannabis at a level that most normal people had never been able to access. So it let me see everything that was coming in from other countries, and it let me get an incredible education on quality and difference. And I didn't really understand that it was going to be my life, and that happened years later, where I end up getting caught in a cultivation case in '83 and get incarcerated. So I get dragged out of high school, get incarcerated, and when I get out of training school is when I went in the military. And it was to really kind of get out of the neighborhood. My family was in prison. Most of my friends were about to go to prison, and I just said, maybe there's going to be a better life. So I said, let me go in the military, and I'll learn how to do salvage diving. And I realized that the Coast Guard would be better service for me to function in, but I would get sent to the Navy, go through school, come back to the Coast Guard, and we were involved. And I didn't realize, like, the war on drugs. I didn't really understand what the war on drugs meant. Like, I knew that in '83 it was aggressive because I got hit, but I didn't understand that it was an international level uh, war. I didn't quite catch that the drug war entirety was so big. So I go in the Coast Guard, and I didn't really expect to be involved in the drug war. Well, I find out I'm in the drug war, and I'm getting dropped out of helicopters to go dive on, drug trafficking vessels out in the Pacific Ocean. And on one of those missions, we get dropped in the water, and we're having to work with the DEA. And they left us out in the water, and they wouldn't give us a hand to get back in the ship because it was raining. So as divers, we were all pissed off. We had to figure out how to get back in the boat, and we're all saying, like, we'll never work with you guys again. And I go into the galley, which is the kitchen on a vessel, and that's where the drug crew is all sitting. And they had found no drugs on the boat. These guys were extremely sophisticated and experienced, and they're being held in the galley. So I go in the galley and sit down, and I'm in my wetsuit and stuff, and they start to talk to me. And they were all ex-Canadian Navy, and they were all deep water sat divers, and they had got out of the Navy and became drug traffickers. And so we start having this conversation about diving and what I was doing. And they said to me, they go, "What did you do prior to being a diver?" And I leaned over and I was like, "The same shit you guys are getting chased down for, except at a smaller level." And they laughed and they were like, "You don't belong here. You really should go. You should think about your career decision and realize that what you're wanting to do, which is go work in oil rigs, And to do deep water salvage, it's not what you think it is. And cannabis is the future. And I realized at that moment that I had more in common with the drug traffickers in the vessel than I did with anybody I worked with. And it made me understand that I really was trying to run away from a place, but I was running away from something I loved. And so what it did was it set me on that mission where as soon as we got to port, I started buying plant science books and I started secretly looking into cultivation so that I would be able to have some skill set. And then when I got out of the military in 89, the last day I was in the service in uniform with the government vehicle, I went and picked up all my grow lights in Berkeley at Berkeley Indoor from Victor. And I went home and sparked up. And it's I've never stopped since. So I started, smoking in 78. I start growing in probably 81. I get hit in 83. And I take that break in between in the military where I still consume secretly, but no cultivation. But as soon as that last day of the service came from 89 forward, I've never stopped.
Oh, that touches my heart because of Operation Green Merchant and Victor being the just for people who don't realize Berkeley Indoor Garden is held in high regard and respect. May they rest in peace because they're now closed. But
Mm-hmm.
they fought and kept open during the Operation Green Merchant and yeah, refused to work with the DEA, etc. So yeah, shout out to Victor. Yeah, wow.
Solid, man. You know what he did for me too was when I went in there, they had a plumbing leak, right? Water was squirting everywhere. And everybody knew what to do. I said, listen, I said, I know how to fix this, right? Because I used to dewater ships, right? So I was like, I can fix this for you real quick. And I'm in uniform. And so I fixed the water leak and he laughs and he's like, what are you doing here? And I said, oh, I got the vehicle to pick up my shit and I want to spark up. And he was laughing so hard. And he said, listen, he goes, we're supposed to take your ID for all this shit. He said, I'm just going to sign my name on all your paperwork for fixing the water. So like, Victor was a stallion. And the whole staff there was unique because most of them were going to Cal getting degrees in botany. So it let me go to a place where there was really good agricultural information present. And all you had to do was be cool and you could leave the building with these guys and go have lunch. And it let me really start to understand the world of cannabis from a professional perspective that no grow magazine, no grow book can provide. And it just really helped define my trajectory. Each step, I got lucky that I met really good people who they didn't mentor me, but they without question inspired me to chase deeper.
Right on. Well, oh, I could go on about that one. But let's get to our next question. Mike D, you're up, sir.
Yeah, that's all. Yeah, that's really good. And that's really good stuff, man. You kind of touched on this, your military experience and everything. Were you able to tell us a little bit more about your journey from your veteran experience and then how it kind of influenced, you starting the Ganjier program and then explain kind of, to the people who don't know what the Ganjier program is, just kind of, talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, totally. For me, like my son didn't go in the military, but oddly enough, like I think almost every one of my adult male family members going back centuries was in the service. And so it was kind of normalized and it also let me see what it was like because they were all combat vets. So, Korea, World War II, and Vietnam. And you get to see the impact of wartime. In World War II, they went through horrific stuff, but they were treated differently when they came home. But after that World War II experience, the perception of the soldier and the perception of what occurred was always negative, and so it kind of stuck with me. And what it did was I really when I got into medical cannabis, it kind of sensitized me in a way to be far more supportive than I might have been because I understood that the people needed help. And so what we did is we provided free clonal material to all the veterans associations. So if you were, and a lot, in all things, there's always people that are good and people that aren't good. And so just because you're a part of an organization doesn't mean you're not a parasite sucking money off and riding someone's misfortune. But if we vet it out right, you could find beautiful people who were legitimately doing real work. And what we did is we supported them with giving them plant material. And I mean, like, 2,000-3,000 clones at a time plant material. So, I mean, we were feeding people. And what it did was it allowed me to be able to support people that I knew were in need and weren't getting the adequate amount of support from the government. And so, in that respect, it's we understand when you serve. Like for me, some of the stuff you do in the service is the service, but when I'm risking my life to pull people out of the ocean, and there's no one there to pull you out of the ocean, right? It's like you're going in to get them, and you're the only one that's going to get them. And if you don't get them, they're gone. And if you don't figure it out, you're gone. I have always like the best memories of that because it was when I started to really understand like selflessness and community, where like it's the human community. I didn't have to know the person. I just knew that my job was to do this. And it's hard to explain to people that haven't been in that situation. They don't catch that like service is two sides of a coin. There's some shit you like and there's some shit you don't. And it's the stuff that you focus on that really defines it. And so for me, I saw all these veterans that had gone through the Gulf War and had some horrific problems and weren't really getting any support. So, when we got into medical cannabis, what we did is we really tried to make sure that population received support in the way we could. And it was beautiful, positive times because I don't have, I don't know if I don't have PTSD from the military. I got it from living my life. But the people that went through some of the horrific shit they saw and the losses and the violence, anything you can do to help them overcome that boundary so that they can find some form of peace, it's a privilege. And to be a veteran helping veterans is it's kind of the way it has to go. You gotta have to help from inside. The Ganjier was originally a name that my son gave me, right? And so I asked him one day, I said, who am I said, I'm doing so much stuff in herb, and the name that we always used was dope grower, right? Because that's what we were called. We were always, pot grower, dope grower, criminal. And so eventually you embrace it, right? You actually wear that shit like it's the coat of many colors. You're proud of it because you don't care that you're not liked. You know that you're okay with what you do. But I said, I'm doing so many different interesting things. So I asked my young teenage son, how do you define what you do? Because if you can't answer what you do in a sentence, usually you're telling a lie. So I said, what am I doing? And he said he had braces on his mouth. He's got kids now, right? I got grandkids from him. But at that time, he had braces in his mouth, and he's a young, gangly kid. And he's like, Dad, you're a Ganjier. And I said, whoa, what is that? And he said, it's a cannabis culturalist. You're all things herb, man. He goes, you just live there. And I said, wow, I love that word. And it stuck. And I said, I'm going to make that word. I said, one day that'll be in Wiki. You'll be able to look up that word and it'll imply something. I said, you invented word. And he was laughing. Well, he did. And what we did was we created a media company from it. And we used it to create all the Golden Tarp Awards, all our spring events. And the Golden Tarp Awards was a cannabis competition that featured light depth for the very first time. And it was so successful in its era, that 5-year run, that we were the second largest cannabis cup in U.S. history. Only Tim Blake's Emerald Cup took me for a number of participants. So we had a beautiful buy-in, and it allowed us to really highlight and showcase production methodologies and regions and people. And people had wanted me to do a certification, but I don't personally think that I'm smart enough to do one because cannabis is too big for one person. Anybody that says they know the whole industry is full of shit, right? The industry is so complex and big that we may understand it, but you're not qualified to teach every aspect of it. And so I said, if we do some kind of certification and I'm giving you this giant cert, it's not really real to me. So I never did it. And then I get approached from Green Flower, And I've been doing content for them, educational content. And they said, hey, Kev, we have an idea. We want to do a certification with the Ganjier. And I said the same thing to Max and Derek. I said, I'm not into it. But they said, no. We have like 17 other people to wrap around you that we think would create a really robust educational program so that no one person has to carry every field, but we can look at people who are experts in all these fields. And I said, holy shit, that sounds pretty cool. And so we all get together, and the next thing you know, we spent 2 years and like 7,000 hours constructing it, trying to create a program that would be able to give a 50, 60-hour overview of the world of cannabis so that people kind of understood how we got to where we are, which is critical because if you don't understand the struggle to get here, you don't understand the population that inhabited it. So you don't really understand the influence that created the perception. So it's background and it's information and it's vetted information so that the people who take the history lessons, educational components, they get a pretty solid, robust understanding. And then we created a really thorough evaluation system so that we could start to have common language, which was really my goal in how I wanted to see something roll out. I wanted to be able to speak to you in another state, another place, and when I say it's this, you can look at it and go, okay, that's that. It's to me, it's like selling diamonds, and people online lose it over this shit. It's not diamonds; it's easier to score diamonds. I'm like, look, it's the point. It's the point that we can grade a diamond in Israel, and then we can sell it in Zurich, and the grading lets them have an idea of what you're working with so that we're not having to constantly play this Tower of Babel where no one can communicate, no one can move forward, and we argue over semantics. So I said, if we could just get some ideas of what are things we measure, what are things we observe, and be honest about what we don't know, what we can create is an assessment system that can be alive for time, meaning that as more information comes forward, as science improves, it allows us to say, look, we're giving you the best we know right now from every source available so that we can grow. And it allows there to be an evolution. It's kind of like the Constitution. It's either living or bedrock. And depending on how you want to see it, it's either frozen, where the person who put it together in 1776 says this will be how it's going to be in 2026, or it's about the idea that we can look at the Constitution and say, look, the intention was this, but we have to adopt it to the way we operate now because these things don't exist. And so to me, I like the ideas of living constitutions. I like the idea of a living system where it's an admittance that you're not so omnipotent that you can predict what everyone will need into the future. And you're able to say, look, we have an ability to be challenged because we spent so much time working on it that we should have a reasonable defense to not beat you down, but to at least help you alleviate concern. And we launched the program, and uh, I'm trying to think of the attorney's name. Omar Figueroa was adamant. He was brought in, but he was adamant that it needed to be in the Emerald Triangle so that what we could do is take people and let a lot of the people in the world who didn't understand where cannabis kind of birthed. And there's many places. It's not just here. This just happens to be a really great place to have a class. But you also have a large contingent of operators that are historical. So it lets you let people see diversity that used to exist and be able to understand the beginning, and then now they can see it in their current. And it was really effective. And what it did was it took a lot of the small farms that we use to highlight their products. We have no relationship with them. We just say, hey, you have good product, you're a good farmer. Can we feature you? Can we have students visit you? Can we have you come by and meet the students and show your product and talk about your methodologies? And there was no agenda. There's no connection between us and the farms in any way, shape, or form. It's just purely we wanted to be able to let farms and people touch so that we could hopefully transcend the distribution boundaries that really preclude small operators from getting attention. And at the same time, the grading system says that if you're the largest operator in the world and you score a 93, it's still a 93, whether people like your operation or not. You can't pick favorites, right? If you're a grader, Just like if you're a competition judge, it doesn't make a difference if I like you or I don't like you. That's not why I'm there. I'm there to judge your product, not you. If your product is what we're judging, we judge the product. If people are asking me to judge people, I don't want to be involved in it. I'm not qualified. But I can judge a product because we can create clear criteria. And that really became pretty effective. And all in all, I think we had maybe 1,400 people through the program, a little under 396, 97 graduates, 20 different countries. There's Ganjier, and the impact on the industry, if we look at industry impact, is this around $2.5 billion of products sold under Ganjier retail heads. So we had a good impact, and I think that it reflected in the fact that you started to see the people who implemented these programs have a better communication with the public, so they could help the public make better informed decisions, but in a way that wasn't so much we're going to educate you. It was purely they learn how to better listen and then observe and then fulfill. So we had a guy named Aaron Varney come in, and Aaron was part of the council, but Aaron runs Dockside Cannabis in Seattle, and he's just a phenomenal operator and couldn't be a nicer human being too. And so he came in and he became our, we say, like, dispensary relations expert. So it allowed all the students that came through the program to talk to somebody that has a string of dispensaries that are known for high quality customer service. And he was able to create and implement procedures on how do you learn how to communicate with people in a way that isn't overbearing and isn't so leading, and it's very effective. And I think it made some, really good differences. And I get to see the results of the work when I travel. So I'm pretty happy about it.
Well, thank you very much. Michael Krautwitz has a follow-up.
Yeah, I have a comment, and then I have the next question. We're going to be hanging out for a minute, but the follow-up is really simple, I guess. I don't want to leave the Ganjier yet. Tell us a little bit about now. Like, what's it like? How many people go through the program now? I mean, give us a sort of a snapshot, a current snapshot of the
Yeah,
Ganjier
we just
program.
we just finished our 5th year. We have the classes up. Derek Gilman, who's the managing director, he has a ranch that he purchased up in Salmon Creek, which was at one time the largest production watershed in the United States for cannabis production, and just a historical spot. And he's got a gorgeous ranch. So that's where we call the Ganjier campus. And you get to go up into the mountains of Salmon Creek, and you get to kind of immerse yourself in a Humboldt-like experience where it's only weed-related stuff, but you're just knocked out with the beauty of that spot. So we did 5 years, and like I said, I think we had 1,400 through the program and 400 graduates. And the thing is that the graduation was tough at first. So when we first put the program together the first year, we were only pulling like maybe 60% graduation rate because the test was hard, and it was just knocking people out. And what we ended up having was a really sharp girl named Elizabeth Sage. And Elizabeth created a student group so that she would be able to help new students prep and prepare, so that when they showed up at the site, they were already a little sharper than if they had just come off the street. And even though, like, and the hard part is everyone's like, I've been smoking weed for 30 years. But that doesn't mean you're a professional in grading. And it's a hard thing to explain, because all you know of cannabis is, for most people, what they bought off the dealer. And so they don't have extensive experience in a wide range of things at easy access level. The ability to touch a lot of cannabis freely for time gives you different skill sets. And so what Liz did is she took her administrative experience and created this highly effective student group that prepped everybody to come in and move forward. So we went from a 60% pass rate up to a high like 95% pass rate. Because the bottom line is, whether I love you or I don't, I can't fudge the exam. Like, you pass it, you pass it. You don't, you don't. You get a chance to retake it, and you have, you come back and retake the exam. But you just hate to see people's disappointment when they fail. And in those early years, like I would privately warn you and say, look, I'm your instructor and I'm the one that scores the products that you're gonna test against. And I'm telling you privately, you're gonna fail. You're not tuned in enough. And so what we would do is we would privately help the people out, so that when they would come in for the new exam, I would meet you at the B&B and we would review product until you felt comfortable and I felt you were comfortable. And we did all this for free. Like all the extracurricular stuff was just goodwill, because you just hate to see people work this hard and just flail. And a lot of it is they just don't have enough. A lot of communities don't have public cannabis, right? So like I kind of forgot that we've been out in the open. I forgot what it was like to be out in the open until I saw people break down and cry and say, this is the first time I've ever been in a crowd in my life and admit that I'm in love with cannabis. And I was like, what? I forgot what it was like to hide. It's been so many years since I've been hiding that I forgot. And it caught me. And I said, holy shit, man, I'm living in a vacuum, because I'm living in my vacuum and this is not the mainstream. And so what we wanted to do was really be able to create these support systems, and they worked fantastic. Liz Sage and her crew, they end up forming the Ganjier Guild, which is it's not connected to Green Flower or the Ganjier, but it's all the Ganjier graduates that went on and went professional, and it allows them to work together collaboratively. See, I'm not a certified Ganjier, right? And which is funny, because people will be like, but you're in the Ganjier. I said, I am, but I was the Ganjier before there was the Ganjier, so I'm already known. And if I get certified, right, I'm the one who tests you. I'm the one you test against. If I certify, what it does is it really screws the student, because if we both walk into the room, we both have the same certification, except I'm the one that put the program together. I guarantee they're going to talk to me first. So what I said is, listen, I don't need the certification, but you do, because it signifies that you went through a process and that you did something to display skill. If I want to do anything official which means put a Ganjier certification on something, I have to hire one. I can't stamp it myself because I didn't go through the program, which is the point. It allows the students to be my equals, and then it allows them to actually be greater than me in terms of having that ability to stamp a product that's certified by a Ganjier. And if you're an instructor, if you're ever a trainer, and I did training in the military, I've been training people for years. Sometimes the coach wants to be more famous than the athlete, but that's not a good coach. Good coaches want the athletes to do well. The coach knows how they got there. The athlete knows how they got there. But what matters is the athlete gets to shine in the public because they did the work. And I wanted the Ganjier students to get to shine. So when I go in to do anything official, I have to reach out to Ganjier, which brings them in. And it allows me to work with students in a collaborative manner where they get to be greater than me on that project at that moment. And that shit matters, right? Like you got to turn your volume down so that others can be heard. And it's the only way to really develop community, I think, in that regard. The public has to see it not as an ego fest, but as professional trade. And I think it worked pretty well. It allowed me to do some interesting projects and bring in Ganjier, and allowed me to work with the students in a way that made me really happy, because shit, I met 1,400 people, and I'd say 1,395 of them were phenomenal, and 5 of them were just a little off because my personality's off. So it doesn't mean they're wrong. It just means that I'm a little skewed. But the absolute vast majority were people you'd want to hang out with every day. So I got really lucky that I got to be in a program that developed it, and we'll see where it goes. We created some new content. The Green Flower, I was in a lot of colleges. They created some new programs now, and some new people are in the college programs. But the world of cannabis changed dramatically. And what you have fundamentally the race to the bottom, where it comes down to who can price war each other out of existence. And the customer in some regards is just lost, and has no idea what's taking place. So the ability for people that are in the system to fund their education and move forward is kind of tough. So I don't know where we're going to go from here. I don't know if we'll continue. I know the students will continue because the guild formed and they're going forward. But all in all, cannabis is so unpredictable that it's, and I'm somebody that they bring in to kind of like navigate what's taking place and what's moving forward. This shit is hard to read right now. We are especially in the United States. In other countries, it's a little easier, but woo, in the United States, man, we're volatile right now. And there's no way to predict who's going to whisper in the ear and get results. So when you have alcohol whispering in the ear of the guy that initiated the hemp bill, and now he becomes anti-hemp, you know, who would have predicted McConnell to make a flip? All of a sudden, you drop $30 billion industry right out so that it can be taken over by the people who feel threatened by the rise of this product line. So, like, we kind of understand this takes place, but to see it in real time and to see the speed that it gets enacted and get to see the effectiveness of it, that's hard to predict and plan. But all in all, the students, they did an incredible job. And what the students did was they kind of leaned into each other and said, hey, what we have is a 1,400 person coalition that's global, that's in some of the largest and smallest companies in the world. So people that are running the biggest brands in the earth and people that are just micro. And it lets them all communicate privately so that the information can be gleaned from both sides, because all information is valuable if you understand how to put it to work. So it was a beautiful program. And if I walked away tomorrow, I have nothing but really, really great memories. And I got to work with some really sharp people, man. I worked with Swami. I worked with Nick Tatum. I worked with Amanda Ryman. I worked with Wendy. I work with Aaron. I work with Derek Gilman. I think Derek Gilman, the one who put the program together, is probably one of the best evaluators I've ever met in my life. I mean, so if I wanted to have a professional evaluator in my life evaluating cannabis, I'd let Derek do it. So, you know, you get to meet people that are just absolutely good at their job. And then we got to, Frenchie was part of it too. And I knew Frenchie prior, but, you know, to work with Frenchie on this was a gift. And Mel Frank, working with Jim was something special because I always respected him. And Pat King was in there, and Janine Coleman was involved, and Omar, and Alec Dixon from SC. So you had lab experts. And so all in all, there was just this cornucopia of talent. And each person was really good at what they did in their individual direction. So it was everything that I think I needed to have to do it, because like I said, I knew that I didn't have the ability alone to do a certification on something as complicated as cannabis.
All right, Mike, with our next question.
Yeah, I've been taking notes. I didn't want to stop you, but I do have a couple of things I want to talk about.
Yeah.
Yeah, first of all, I guess as sort of introduction, we've been operating in 1 degree of separation away from each other. I'm on the board of directors of Origins Council.
Totally.
So yeah.
So
So
you guys
we're
influenced
closer than you
me.
might.
Well, you influenced me through the appellation that it was Calvino and Janine and Frenchie. And then I'm the one that had the ability to talk to McGuire in my office, which allowed us to put that appellation in the organic certification in place, because he came to speak to me. And that's what I had different, is I had this pipeline into my office of every politician in the state, because at this moment in time, I was considered some kind of a wizard of weed. And what I tried to do was understand what they wanted, and I tried to figure out what could we get and what could we not get. And I explained to McGuire, I said, listen, you can't do much for us, but you can definitely enact appellations, which creases, and he didn't, and he's a smart guy, but I was like, you're missing it. Appellations are long-term land value. Your constituents will have more value in the places they live, which makes the regions more valuable, which makes your position as politician who governs them more valuable. And then the organic standards, I said, listen, what we need is some system that lets us have a clear pathway forward if we ever go federally legal. And that was some wishful thinking. But what it did was it started to create, but it's positive direction, where you start to get an appreciation for people and a process, so that we're able to utilize, same thing, it's common language. verbiage that lets customers know what a thing is. So when they go to a store, they know, hey, when I had a good experience, I experienced sun grown, and there were some other words I remember. And it allows them to be able to help the bud tender, the staff make those decisions on how to steer them. And in all those aspects, I think that it went really really well. But yeah, your group has been kicking ass for a long time. So I mean, I get inspired by you guys too.
It's a push pull, man, as you just described. Thanks. And I just want to say first off, I wrote myself a little note here. We don't know how the future of cannabis will unfold. The past may not repeat, but it's certainly in tune. And in my opinion, you have a very distinct place in the future of cannabis. And that's what we're talking about. Like, when do you start working on the future, right? When is the appropriate time to start working on the future? But also to try to imagine the future, without sort of I think people have their own bias. If you walk around all day with a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail, right? So, anyway,
Yeah.
yeah, so I keyed on something that you said particularly. I can't remember the exact quote, but it's something like grading holds here as well as it'll hold in Zurich. That once you have some way to actually talk about the cannabis, that you can use that in that way. That's really interesting. The Veterans Action Council has been engaged in some treaty work. And our larger team is working mostly not in Vienna anymore at the UN, but more in Geneva in the World Intellectual Property Organization, and working around trade. And basically, again, I wrote a note. The treaty has changed enough to support trade in medical marijuana now. Working on trade 100 years ago, regionally varied products were totally available in medicine, and they were specific. I mean, if you wanted certain characteristics, you knew that you can get that from like African cannabis africanus, or if it might be different from India, you get cannabis indica. And even Park Davis and Yellow proved you could actually get a workable cannabis medicinal product here in the United States. They called it cannabis americana, and
Mm-hmm.
all that was driven out basically by this treaty system. And what we found as we're doing this research is that all the other herbal medicines, if you will, are handled, the genetics, the trade, the partnerships, all the commerce are all basically handled under this Convention of Biological Diversity, and a whole bunch of agreements that flowed from that Convention on Biological Diversity. And cannabis and poppy and coca, because they were segregated away and put in this treaty system, were isolated from that, and kept away from that. And we're trying to picture how that's going to be reunited. What is it going to look like? How is it going to unfold? And cannabis medicine, as I said, that's ready to roll right now. Go working on adult rec, or if you will, is a more tricky thing. It's really, really complicated. But medicinal cannabis is not. It's legal. It is ready to work on internationally, and the standards can be negotiated by countries. There's no longer an onerous, requirement by the treaty. We changed the treaty back in 2020. An unbelievable achievement in the cannabis movement that we actually did something. We changed the international law. We haven't, like you said, it's still wishful thinking to change U.S. law, but we changed the international law first. So, but anyway, that's all to say. I want to take this opportunity. This is a roundtable for us, and I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of throw that across your bow and let you know that's what we're working on, and just sort of allow you to speak on that if you want. We brought in David Watson to our meeting in Vienna to talk about the Convention on Biological Diversity and to talk about that bridge back to international trade on cannabis that once was. I've been heckled a little bit by some of our mentors and some of our intellectual cannabis, cannabis experts, that what I'm trying to do in the future, based on the past, may not work. The past may have been destroyed. Some of the diversity and the the regionally different cannabis that I know of from the history books, and also a little bit from the childhood that we shared in the 70s, and with some of the cannabis that we got to sample in the East Coast. Yeah, there's nothing on the marketplace today that really compares to the Colombian gold, the Acapulco gold, the Panama red, the Hawaiian Michoacan, the Maui Wowie, the Cambodian red, etc. And hopefully we get back to that. And you are working on the way to describe that. I guess we're working on sort of the nuts and bolts of how to make it happen. And the industry is not necessarily working in the same direction as either of us. So
And now
it's
the
common.
industry's got its direction, but you got to remember too that we we look at things through our own perspective, and we intensify the experience because it was positive or negative for us. And what we know is that, the era of Panama Red, where the aroma almost made you like lift off the ground, that might not be as important to the people of today, because they're it's and I know that from just conversations. And what matters is that we all understand the one common thing is that we all have an interest in cannabis, and as consumers we're not competing for who's right with each other. What we're all trying to do is figure out, how do we get the best product, how do we create the fairest system. And ultimately, that's why for me, I'm a huge homegrown advocate, where like every I think that these artificial limits of how much you can grow because you're going to sell the product, um the idea that you are just trying to constantly drive tax revenue. You can homebrew, you can home still. You just can't go above a certain level, but the amount that you can home still and home brew is radically different than the amount we can technically grow for consumption. And I think that if you want to normalize something, you allow it to not have money connected to it, right? Because once you put a dollar sign on it, it automatically segregates who can and who cannot. And that's what I learned from the veterans program. It's what I learned from all the medical marijuana. I never understood medical marijuana. And it's funny because I had a 215 in like 97. And I got it from Todd Mickeria, right? Me and Mickeria were buddies. We had this beautiful relationship for years following that shit. But everything I did was too criminal, too much, too many plants for any 215 to cover, right? So I just knew that it would help me if I had a bag of weed in my pocket. But other than that, no value. And I wasn't around people that were ill. I'm around hustlers and traffickers. And I knew who Perone was, and I knew that like some of the stories of Brownie Mary and the crew. But I didn't get a clue on this until I took over a facility. And then I got to see people come in and physically break down and sit down on the floor and cry because there was no cannabis for free and they had no money and they depended on it for their basic sanity. And the number of individuals who had serious medical problems that were able to replace a trash bag of pharmaceuticals through just cannabis usage. And it tripped me out. And it just made it changed my whole perspective of cannabis. I was really, really ignorant about the world of medical cannabis. And I knew that it had all these benefits and effects. It's just that what I learned was people don't talk to you about those problems. So most people don't. They're upset that they have this issue. They're upset that they have to do what they need to do. And the stigma of cannabis created also that secondary shame and secretism. So you end up having this culture that exists with chronic pain or chronic inflammation or chronic mental illness, that cannabis seems to really take the edge off and make it to where they can function day to day at a much higher level without the side effects of pharmaceuticals. That shit escaped me because I just didn't see it. I was young. I wasn't having medical problems. My family was old New England, right? So cannabis was equivalent to heroin. So nobody was just puffing herb in New England at the time. Like, oh, grandma has a bad back. She's puffing a joint. Like, holy shit, she might as well be booting heroin. And literally it was that. People don't catch it. I'm like, you don't catch it. Herb was as dirty. I went to the prison to visit my cousin who was doing 200 years, right? My cousin's in prison with a 200-year sentence. And I'm visiting him and I'm telling him I got tapped on some weed charges. And he was horrified. He was like, oh my God, of all things, weed. And he was going off. And then I'm looking at him and he's looking at me. And we both realized that, like, he's in prison for 200 years for some really serious shit. And he goes, well, maybe my opinion isn't accurate. And man, we laughed. But the point was that herb was that dirty just 1980. Once Reagan got in, like it was dirty in the 70s, but when Reagan got in, man, they did a number on stigma. And I just wasn't exposed to enough people who were medical. And I think it's the same issue the veterans face. They it's hard to admit something happened that impacted you so greatly that it's above your scope to work with it. And the fact that you have to look for medication, the fact that you have to get help is shameful because our society makes everybody look like shit when you're not some kind of Instagram superstar every day. Right? So none of the shit we do is real. It's real people live in real time, real interaction. And that to me was the essence of medical marijuana. And then because of that, it's what let me get tied into Terrence Allen. When we went after the medical policy in California, which was what was Mercusa, Terrence and the crew came up to me and said, hey, we need help. And I said, why are you coming to me? And he was like, Kev, he goes, you just don't understand it, but people with money listen to you. He said, so if you helped us, money would flow into the campaign and we would be able to get medical rights put into California separate from legalization. And I understood the value of that because I was in Washington State when they stripped the medical out of Washington State. And I watched what they did. They have two systems. One makes money, one doesn't. They remove the one that is not giving them that revenue. And then they took every single person's name on the registry and they went and took a visit to your house to make sure you're not cultivating, want to check out your shit. So now you're on a list, right? And they come in to visit you. And, no difference than it is today, but just in that form. And I watched all these people get devastated. And I remember watching all these old women just weeping. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, whoa. I didn't expect that they would take a system out because Washington State had a robust system. And I'll never forget that sight. They were literally weeping because their houses had been raided. 5 minutes earlier, they were legal. And then 5 minutes later, you're not. And that's caught me. And so when I got approached from Terrence to work on that project with him, it was something I think was probably the most impactful thing I've ever done in my life was that, and then I paid for it. The fucking cops caused me some problems. They gave me a good beating for being a good steward of the community. But I would still do it again because ultimately what we have entrenched medical rights in California. And the even with the bill change, right? The big beautiful bill pulled out some of those protections. They were reinstalled, right? So the medical got reinstalled. So now once again we have that where if the medical programs are run to a level that's reasonably maintained, the federal government will expend no resources to enforce them, right? So we have a medical program. And so for me, I'm just grateful that California had a system. I grew up in the system, but I just never saw it. And when I saw it so clearly. And then I had an ability to actually learn how they created it. And then, eventually it ends up where you're hanging out at Dennis Perone's house with his crew and you're just really understanding how a bunch of people got together to do some good for friends that were dying. And it was that simple, except that they were that ballsy. They were tigers, boy. Woo-hoo-hoo. Yeah,
Oh
Dennis
yeah,
Perone was a little man with the set
they
teeth.
were. He stood definitely taller than his stature for sure, and
You're that's your world, ATN. Like for me, I'm
yeah.
somebody that touched it, but that was your base.
Well, Dennis was the first one, and to come to our can rally and speak because and I think the only reason he came is because I was a veteran too, right? Because he was also Air Force,
Yeah, yeah.
veteran, and he survived Tet Offensive, which he never talked about. It wasn't until he and I were private and smoking a joint one time because he was like, "You were in the shit, weren't you?" I was like, "You were in the shit, weren't you?" You know what I'm saying? So it was just one of those little moments where you just kind of nod, but you don't really talk about your shit because, as you can freak people out who are not in the military. They don't understand, experience. But our bond was there. All right, let's get back to our questions. Michael
All right, that was
Crowley.
good enough. Thank you for letting me have that moment.
No, it's a beautiful moment, man. It's totally beautiful. Michael.
Hey, much love, and thanks for mentioning Dr. McArea. Much love. May he rest in peace. He's a wonderful friend to our efforts. And two more quick things before I read my question. One, I just loved your son's perspective and the Ganjier source. I think it's just fantastic that your family, your children understand what you do at such a great level. And one last little thing, working in New York on a project with Dr. Sunil Agarwal. I was talking to him just back and forth, and he stopped and he looked at me and he said, it strikes me that I think you get, it seems, a medical benefit from helping others. So that goes back to what you were saying about, helping others and how important that is. Like, I think we do. I think we actually get like some sort of medical benefit from that if we're successful in really actually helping others. So anyway, let me read my question. You spent decades working with cannabis genetics and cultivation. So from your perspective, what has been misunderstood by the regulators? I mean, let's dig into the plant a little bit. Tell us what the regulators are missing about the cannabis plant genetics and cultivation.
The cannabis regulators?
Yeah.
What are the regulators missing? Fundamentally, the issue with the regulators, 95% of them, is that they were raised on drug war rhetoric, and they worked for people who were older than them, who made the Kool-Aid. So the people that made the Kool-Aid and the people that drank the Kool-Aid, which is this anti-drug rhetoric, that's how they still perceive the product. And so to them, the idea that this plant is even present on the ground in a space is some ungodly sin, and that it's such a dangerous substance. It needs a level of security and safety that I tell people that, I mean, I'm being honest. You can get a machine gun license in California, right, to buy and sell machine guns. Now you have to buy them and sell them to other legal people, but you could go through the process through the ATF, and you could get a machine gun license easier than you can get a cannabis license. I had to get a relative out of what we'd say. One of my relatives had some issues. Their child was put into the custody system, and I went and recovered my relative until the problem was rectified. The speed at which I was to retrieve a child through a system, which is without question a very valuable item in life, and the speed that they ascertained that I was trustworthy, right, through like FBI scan, just like cannabis. The pace of that shit compared to getting an herb license, I'm telling you, I grabbed a kid and snatched my nephew up, right, quicker than I could anything with weed. It blows my mind that we're still living in this fantasy land of drug war. And that's the primary issue, that they just what they've been taught to believe, and it's what really almost all people in politics believe, is that cannabis is a single molecule like ethyl alcohol, because they're all drunks. I'm not being aggressive here, but if you kind of notice, there's a similarity among the certain generation, and that was the drinking generation. So to them, beer and whiskey, they're different products, but the intoxicant is the same product. They all contain the same exact product, wrapped in a different vehicle, but what intoxicates you is a single molecule. They don't catch that that's not how cannabis works, and that's not how we work as people. That there has to be differentiation, there has to be diversity, there has to be this huge cornucopia of choices, because it allows you as an individual to intuitively find the product that lines up with your needs. So you don't want 7 products to fill the system. You want 7,000 products to fill the system. That in order for this to happen, you must have multitudes of cultivators of all levels that are willing to work with small batch. They're not trying to be billionaires. They just want to have a small farm. They want the farm to pay for itself and derive some small profit. And they would love to work with something that was very exquisite, designed for people who they've noticed over years seem to get a very positive outcome from. That recognition of the fact that market exists, and if it was satisfied, they'd be happy, and that farm would sell to those people. And if you scaled the permitting to fit that reality, that shit would work. But what you got is this perception that all of us, we hear it all the time, right? It's ended now because Humboldt's so poverty stricken. But the number of times I went to go, and I've been doing licensing for years, dig up a barrel, go dig up another barrel. And you're looking at them and you're like, what? The barrels got dug up a long time ago, man. You're like, you guys have been fleecing us for years and you've sucked the money dry. And every time we deal with you, it's an unbelievable cost. And I'm involved. I used to be involved in other construction related projects, and it was nowhere near this amount of double dipping. And in just every single entity had to take a bite of your ass because they figured that this golden goose was so big that they could bite off all the legs and the wings and it would still fly. And it is. It's encourage home grow. What you learn in the legal cannabis system is the best thing that can possibly take place is if the individuals have any ability to collaborate and create their own product and just check. And I'm somebody that I'm in the legal system, but if we all had to collapse in order for it to rebuild, it would almost be the best thing because the state has failed so miserably and they enact their regulations so poorly and they have such misguided views of how to operate because they're in complicit operation that the metric system Swiss cheese, the regulatory systems bullshit. Customers don't have any clue really what they're getting because the problem is it's an illusion, and California covers it up. They spend $5 million on campaigns to say cannabis is clean when they had a whistleblower say, no, we know they're using other chemical categories that aren't being part of the testing process. So they're getting around testing. And they're using things that are most definitely not for human consumption. They're just not on our banned list. And then the state is like, well, they're not on the banned list when we haven't put them on yet. But the bottom line is that can't be in human consumption any other substance. And the argument is that that's what they do. So what you have is some of the craziest shit ever. And what it does, to get back to the point of genetics and cultivation, is it wipes out these small forms of organic cultivation where, and I would say organic in terms of like biologically driven sun-grown systems that are small cycle, low impact, and high carbon sequestering from the way you're creating what you're creating. So you have this like biological benefit, and then you have a diversification benefit where you have a different type of plant that's adapting and acclimating to an area. So what you're doing is you're creating the normality that if people can understand grape cultivation, there's no difference. The grape that was acclimated to an area, they had a predictability. They knew if they put it in similar areas, they'd get a similar result. So it starts to create agricultural models that make sense, that are predictable, that let customers who buy product have some form of consistency. See, I would love if I knew a farm produced the same product and they were going to do it for like 10, 15 years. And because it was in a lot, it was enough for people who wanted it. They wanted a chocolate bar. And you're like, I want the chocolate bar. And if it was good enough, there would actually be a line and you'd have to order it. You'd have to commit. And what it would do is it would start to allow these unique operations to exist, to succeed, and to bank differences in the gene pool so that when we get into the problems, which we will in the future, of too many things interconnected, pathogenically fragile, we have a way out. Like we've done this with all ag. So like none of this shit, like I study this all the time. There's nothing that you can't look at in cannabis that you can't model with another crop and say, look, if you take the stigma away, look at how they operated, look what they did right, look what they did wrong, and look at the result. So there has to be bulk products that are grown in mass, but they have to be at a certain level because all humans deserve quality regardless of your wallet. And I mean quality like it doesn't have any toxic shit in it and you're processing it in a cautious manner.
Are
And then,
there, I have a
yeah,
question, Kevin. Are there, I mean, you've trained multiple people around the world as well as in the United States. Who is getting it right in regulation? Or do you feel or has no one got it right? Or are they completely not understanding? I always thought because they don't use cannabis, they don't really understand because the majority of these people who are regulators also come from the ABC world, because
Mm.
that was as close as an association that they could
Yes.
find, I guess, for a vice, right? So, but of course, those people always seem to be lacking in their understanding and require they need to be going through the Ganjier program en masse. But of course, they're willful ignorance. But that aside, who do you feel is doing it right, or is anyone doing it right?
You know, and it sounds jaded, but I don't think anyone's doing it right. I think what you're seeing is the cultivators and the operators showing adaptability. So what you're getting to see is the operators adapting to the changes and figuring out, and what you're seeing is a complete collapse of diversity because of it. So like it's so hard to figure out how to work in the system that it chops the people out. But anybody that's, and I know people who are alive and they're still doing somewhat all right. To me, that's a victory. So I know that there's the word no one doesn't apply, but I think that no matter what country I look at, it's not when it starts that it matters. It's everybody's like, look, it's starting. It's gonna be a great time. It's the pace of its development, and then what? How do they manage it? And then what do you do with the product once it leaves? Right. So there's only, if people don't catch it, there's only like 360 tons of product exported around the world, right? The last house does 300 tons themselves. So when I talk to people about international pressure, I'm like, everybody's, these new markets are popping up, and I'm like, the whole earth is 360. One farm in California is 300. So if one new farm comes online correctly in this system, it completely can eradicate all of these operations all over the world simultaneously if it has better logistics. So like it creates this problem where the people that are building the industry have no clue what they're built. And that's what I learned. I learned that every industry is built indiscriminately, and that it comes down to money thrown at the wall and what sticks works. And I used to have all these ideas about how things were created until I got into illegal cannabis, and I realized, whoa, they break it until it figures out how to function.
Or how to fix it?
Yeah, and it's a process. And so we're always trying to say, look at wine can ship, but wine petitioned for like 80 years to do that. So things aren't so fast in liquor either, and anything to do with regulatory is difficult for people to understand because they don't catch that and I'd love to say everybody's moral, but what I notice working with regulatory groups and politicians in general is that many of them are more concerned about, I don't want that mistake put on my record, right? And if it's about safety, that's something that no one, you're like, oh my God,
Right.
a child was poisoned.
They'd rather have an albatross around the neck, right?
Yes, literally. And so it creates a situation where everyone's trying to not get in any kind of situation that's painful. The people that are working within it, the workers, are working hard. Like I watch the people because they're doing their jobs. They're trying to approve a permit. They're trying to understand regulations. They're trying to build appellations. But the problem is that it's above them, and everyone at the end of the day wants to protect their position. And if it's political, it's essential. So how do you almost have to like age them out? And that's what I realized is I thought I'd see what I wanted to see in my lifetime. And we worked so hard to get these stable medical rules in, and we worked so hard to start to understand how can you have legalities, which I knew would impact me in terms of price point. But I saw too many people personally that I didn't even know, but they came to me too damn late for help. And I don't know if we could have helped them or not, but they got there too late because of the stigma. They said this shit's illegal and we don't break the law, and they were furious at me. They were so mad. Because I was a symbol of a world that was dirty, and now they were in my office begging for help, and it made them feel ashamed, and they would yell it. And then when we helped them, man, they'd sit down and just cry, and you just let them cry in your office, and you'd sit with them, and then you'd provide them all the material. And we were doing it for free, man. Like I was funding this shit. It allowed them to feel they had some support because legalized medicine had basically eaten them alive. And that kind of shit stuck with me. And I always tell people, I said, you can talk all the shit you want, but get up on a stage and explain to someone that your paycheck was more important than 1,000 people in the state of California who would have died because they couldn't get past the stigma of legality. We define those people as good citizens, right? We define them as law-abiding good citizens. And when they follow the rules and you do everything, you're nice to your neighbor, you do all your shit, you get completely hammered at the end of your life. And all I saw was betrayal in their eyes of like the system. And I was the system that they were taught was bad. It was heavy, man. Because like I said, I have a background in this shit,
Oh
right?
yeah.
So I'm just like I'm working with it as it's happening, and I just tried to be really tender and allow them. Then I let them yell at me. I had a little chair in my office I'd sit in, so it made me even look smaller. And I'm only 5'7", so it isn't like I'm tall to begin with. But I made myself like a dwarf in the room, so that people who felt weak could feel strong, and I got to see the real people emerge. And all of that activity is what forces you to understand you must have progress in something. You can't keep cannabis in a little gray zone where only some benefit. It has to be an open benefit. And then we just have to figure out how do we work within that. And each country I work at, each place I go, if you're having to import cannabis, your system isn't stable because why aren't you growing it in your own country? It's because it's so regulatory costly that it doesn't make sense, right? So you just import. If you're looking at export countries, why are they exporting? Because they have saturated a domestic market with too much canopy. So they're having to dump it out of the country, and if they're dumping it out of the country, it's to get the margin price higher because they're not making enough money in country. So when you analyze all the markets and you look at them and you see how this thing moves back and forth and you see the total flow of it, like people don't catch that Humboldt was doing 8 billion in wholesale cannabis. I got dropped on a ship that had 120 tons in it. One ship, 120 tons, right? That's 1/3 the Earth's export right now. And that shit was in 1988, right? So, like in 88, I was on a vessel. It was one of the largest raids ever in history, right? But I laughed. It was 120 tons, 240,000 pounds of reefer. And that's 1/3 the current Earth's number. So when you start to look at like canopy sizes and perspectives and you put them in and you're like, well, wait a second. We used to have 1/3 the Earth's load in one shipload, and now that's the entire export market. One farm in California could disrupt the entire export market of the world. That means that every country involved is having some crisis. They're either flooding or it's too expensive. And for us, we can't enter the international system because of our situation, right? So like we're a non-entity in the global market until we get into the pharmaceutical side, and that shit will be single molecule patentable formulations. It's crazy.
Yeah, but nobody wants those. People,
No,
nobody,
no,
nobody's diverting Marinol. Nobody is diverting,
no, no.
Sativex. No, everybody wants the whole plant. All right,
Yep.
let's carry on with our questions.
Yep.
Next up will be Mary Lynn Mathry. Mary Lynn, are you there? Mary Lynn.
I'm here. Sorry, couldn't get to the video, etc. Hey, Kevin, boy, this is just
You.
great listening to you. And as you talked about the regulators and the fact that they're stuck in the old world, to an extent, that's what happens with healthcare professionals. We've got so many that have grown up with cannabis as a drug of abuse. That's all they see. And
Yes.
I
Yeah.
mean, to this day, poor patients come into the hospital, they either get tested and found positive for pot, or they might even admit they use it. And the next thing you know, they've got cannabis use disorder on their charts. Um, so trying to change these people to accept, to let them think that cannabis can be a good thing you're doing, not a bad thing. It's a tough one. But sticking to medical, my question is, veterans often rely on cannabis for pain, post-traumatic stress symptoms, and sleep. What do you think veterans should understand about cultivar selection and terpene profiles when seeking consistent therapeutic outcomes?
That there's some generalities that can be observed where we can say that, humans are snowflakes, but we're still snow. So the properties that affect snow. And you'll start to realize that you can't rely on the internet because especially, and now it's even worse with AI because the information the AI is grabbing is wrong. So it's perpetuating wrong material. But if you have a group of veterans, if you have a group of anybody, you get together and you sit down and just say, hey, on a pad of paper, write down what varieties worked for you over the course of your smoking career. Like, what did you smoke for what, when, why, how'd you like it? Why'd you like it? And just write it down. It's just empirical. It's what you observed. It's what you feel. And you start to take that information and sit down with the group and you can start to chart it and create like a Venn diagram. And you'll start to able to figure out what plants seem to work for most people for that problem. And what it does is it allows you to create these internal databases so that when someone who's coming into cannabis and they're saying, look, I'm trying to get off of the pharmaceutical aids because I'm having liver issues is what I noticed primarily, right? People that were on painkillers were always having some liver problem and that they needed something to work. And I'd say, okay. And I would just try to talk to them privately. Like, if you could help me understand what's wrong, I don't think I'm a doctor. I know I'm not one, but I talk to enough people that I'm recognizing patterns. And what it'll do is it'll let me tell you that I just noticed many people that came in with your similar situation, they benefited from these directions, these profiles. And what it did at my shop was it allowed people to start making more informed decisions.
That's right.
And it saved them a fortune financially because they were able to get directed into a narrow focus of possibilities. And it started to also create community between the individuals. So I did it with medical groups, and I would put elderly together primarily and say, look, you're all trying to figure out how to use this. So I would get them together myself, do the initial like meeting at a place. And then we would talk about cannabis and I'd give them empowerment of how to use tools and what this stuff is and how you would use it. And then we would show them how to use vaporizers so they understood how to get heat temperature ranges right. And then we'd even have them driven home in a van so that they didn't have to drive and then get their car back to them the next day. But what it did was it started to get all these people together so that they were able to collaboratively solve their problem using homeopathic medicine because there's no accurate guide. And everyone says, well, there is a guide. And I'm like, not really. The problem is that everything that we talk about with cannabis is based off a name, not off of a genotype sequence. So without that, and I know this sounds funny, but like you and I could call the two different plants the same thing, and we both swear to God it's the right thing until we get in the room and realize I'm wrong, that the plant that was renamed, we were taught it was this name, now it's that name. That kind of stuff is so prevalent in our world that nobody really has an idea. So when you use the name of a thing, it's so malleable that it's not accurate, right? And you can't even use secondary metabolite profile because it's so variable. And I tried mapping with secondary metabolite profiles, and it's too variable. It lets you understand what farm produces the most of something and who gives you the best blend, but it doesn't clearly identify this is that thing where genotype does. So if genotype's connected to a clone, and then you're able to say, hey, this is that SFV cut, right? And it works for you for pain relief. And someone that wants to pick it up someplace else says, well, how do I know it's the one? We had it genotyped, and what it does is for you for $200, you could get it genotyped and prove it's exactly the same one. But you could believe me, but the bottom line is you could substantiate so that if it had a profound effect on the group of people that you were dealing with in your medical group, you would know exactly what plant it was that did it by its chromosomes, not by a man-given name. That's the issue, right? That there's no truth in this because of the misnaming. And so we're trying to understand how do we do sequencing at pace that's cheap so that we can link it to plants so it's easy to find the information. It's easy to be able to get people repetitive results. And I think that that's the hardest part with cannabis is that you find something that works for you correctly and you lose it, or you buy it once and you get it for a month and then you can't get it again. And for the next 5 years, all you do is talk about that thing. So I know that the relationship is so profound. And thankfully, I don't have for me, herb is more mental than it is physical, right? And so I think I'm a nut without weed, but herb helps me with, without question, have a better, more balanced life. But I can function day to day if I don't have it in my hand. I just would like to have those glasses on. I'd like to see the world through that lens. But for people that have any type of inflammatory issue, pain relief issue, um, sleep, appetite, where like without it they cannot control that situation to a point of quality of life. They need to know exactly what it is, and and if they stay with the same product over time, even though plants evolve, and they evolve through the way they produce their metabolites based off of adaptation, right? So they're adapting to the environment. The more the environment goes a certain route, the more the plant tailors its profile. But it would happen over a course of time to where you'd be able to still maintain a normalcy of effects. You know what I'm saying? Where like it wouldn't be an abrupt change. The plant wouldn't suddenly go from this to this in one season. It would slowly move over seasons, and you would move with it as that time occurred. So that's what people need. If you want stability in what you do, you have to basically create an internal nursery among your collectives. You have to have the data from those plants compiled where everybody who smokes it just creates a simple notebook that says what I got out of it, what I didn't, what I would recommend, what I wouldn't. And you just put that into a sift, and now you can just feed it into AI and say, AI, spit that shit out in paragraphs so anybody can understand it. And it would give you the guide you needed to empower repetitive results correctly.
Sounds great.
I think
Thank
that's the best approach, only accurate one we can think of.
No,
No,
you're right. And the healthcare professionals, the problem they keep saying when they keep calling it a drug, you keep trying to tell them it's a plant, and the idea of medicine, as you say, thousands of medicines, not just
Oh,
one or two
it's
in
the most
cannabis. And
powerful bioreactor I think we found. And so I'm sending seeds into space because cannabis has now been deemed so powerful in its complexity on what you can use it for that it's being considered for space colonization because it's a remediator, it's a fiber, it's a fuel, it's an oil,
food.
all right,
fat.
well, hold on a second. Well, if our planet can make cannabis, do you believe there's other cannabis on other planets out there somewhere?
Oh, I have no idea about that. I personally, I would say that each planet would have its own ecosystem. I can see, the idea of planets are particles smashing into each other, and the more they smash, the more gravity is pulled, and eventually you have a giant ball of liquid rock spinning through space. In our case, we somehow formed an atmosphere, and it allowed us to be able to create an internal bubble around that wrap. But organic matter moving through the vacuum of space to me is hard to, unless, I mean, it could be encapsulated in something, but I just think that each planet would have really its own system.
Michael, follow up?
Yeah, I just want to share something with you real quick. I think it was out in Oregon. These fellows came up with this thing. They called it the M scale, and they tried to
Yeah,
give a code to every little nuance about cannabis so that doctors could call for exactly what they
Why
wanted.
am I
And
hearing you, Michael?
the story, let me tell you the story though. I think it's funny as hell. I was watching them talk to a legislator, and I was sort of in the meeting vicariously because of my activism, and watched them make this presentation. And no kidding, it was like 15 or 20 minutes into the presentation of all the nuances of how M scale works. And the legislator stops me, he says, "So you mean to tell me there's different kinds of cannabis?" It's like I could watch the layers of stone, chip away from his misinformation or misinterpretation. I thought it was hysterical and cute.
yeah.
It's common for most. I have since learned that many people don't understand that, they think like, a whiskey is a whiskey, right? It's a corn or a rye, right? And they don't, when they understand that there's different types of cannabis and how many different kinds there are is when you see their eyes glaze over, and that's never fun. All right, let's get to our next question. Leslie, you're up.
Hey, so you've worked at the intersection of legacy cultivation and modern compliance. How has regulation both improved and undermined quality, safety, and access, particularly in California, where the implementation of Prop 64 led to a significant loss of legacy cultivators and genetics?
Well, you know, the what I like about the new world of regulation is that in terms of safety is that without question you have more clean cannabis available to the public. And for someone who's been involved in cannabis for as long as I have, there was some people who were unbelievably high level and had high ethics and created a product that was pristine. But the vast majority were using any chemical they could on that product to get it to market. And I know because I was a lab drop for the whole county at one point. So almost all lab samples that anybody dropped off for any lab was being dropped off at my spot. So, and I would get the information back, and I wouldn't reveal anybody's info, but I saw the truth of what was really in the cannabis. And so, to me, the customer should never be exposed to that. And that's why I don't like the idea of lab shopping, and I don't like the idea of being clever with your chemical selection so that you can find chemicals that don't have a listing on the banned list. They can't find that molecule because they're not looking for it. But once they are identified that it's present, they can then put a test agent in, and then they can look for it, and then they can find it. But we would say, me personally, that there's far more clean products available, and I think that it's critical. I think that, and regardless whether there's controversy over companies that have dirty product that come out or mold or anything, I'd say in general, you have the highest level of standardized quality in bulk cannabis. And so when we talk about cannabis, there's really different levels of historic consumer. And those that had least amount of access got what they could get their hands on. And so their choices were always less, and the quality was always less, and the things that were involved in it. So you had dirty, moldy pot for a lot of these people, and I'm glad to see it go away. The issue is that in order for the system to work with the taxation level that's been applied, the price has to be so high that it's double the black market, or we're going to call it the traditional market. And the problem with that is that, and this is where I talk to the politicians and I laugh and I'm like, are you clear with what product we're seeking? If I said to you during the course of a day, would you like to buy some illegal leather jackets? You might probably say no. And if I said to you, would you like some stolen tires to go along with that hot car that I got you last week? You'd probably say no. But if I said to you, hey, I got some killer herb, you want to buy it 50 an ounce? You'd look at it and say, damn, you grew that? I said, yeah, in the backyard. You're like, hell yeah, that's $50 an ounce all day. You're doing it illegal. Now in California, we can make this, we can gift it, we can't sell it. If I sold it to you, I'm still committing a crime. I could gift it to you, but I can't sell it to you because we're not allowed to sell cannabis. But the point being is that cannabis is the only substance. I went through the list. I really did my homework on this one. Tell me any other substance that you deal with on a daily level in your life that has such a transferability between illicit and licit. Cannabis is the only substance where if you can't find it in the store, you're going to find it in the street. And you will be 100% okay with buying it if you're a buyer, because most of the pot you bought over the course of your life, you didn't get through a licensed dispensary. So the problem is that it makes it an instant decision to disregard regulated cannabis. So what we do is we attack the illicit market, saying it's you that's causing this problem by selling this product, without recognizing that we've taxed the system so hard that you create a product that's fundamentally, California's only pulling in what, 33% of the people that consume are at the dispensary. So we're losing 7 out of 10. We're supposed to be pulling in $1 billion a year roughly on tax, and pulling in like 200 million, 178. We're talking 5 times less expectation over the course of legalization, which show me any other industry that's a consumption industry that's captured that falls to that level. So the problem is that you have a product that's, for the most part, better than it was prior for most people. For people that are Epicurean, less quality because they don't get the diversity in cultivar selection. So they're like, man, I know I love hamburger, but I really would like to have some Wagyu beef once a year. And so we don't have Wagyu beef anymore because it doesn't fit into the production model, right? You get hamburger. And so, yes, best hamburger ever, but it's hamburger.
And so the issue is that the people who want Wagyu beef once a year are completely unsatisfied. But the people who get, we would say, lower quality pot, lower price point, a lot of them, the ease and the convenience and the stability for those group, they're happy. That 30% that buys, they're buying, and they're continuing to buy. We're not losing the share dramatically every year. It kind of went down and it's kind of plateauing and holding. So we're catching a group of people at certain price points. We're losing everyone else above and below, and you can't get the people that are in regulatory situations to understand that people have been taught to buy cannabis illegally. Right, that's their introduction to it. That this is something that everyone does, and we all buy it illegally. We wink wink and we get it on the side. That's the only substance that I can think of that fits into that category of any product. And so it makes it to where they can't utilize the existing model. It's kind of like why really brilliant business people fail in cannabis, because there's no book to study, because it's a dynamic market. And so anyone who's in it is really blazing trail in real time, and you're making real mistakes at real time. In 20 years, they'll be able to create courses and show the system, and then you'll have a really effective education that allows the individual to be able to say, this is what happened, this is how we predict what will happen. But right now, it's so variable that brilliant people that are extremely bright are struggling. Small farmers that have not enough canopy to compete are struggling. The customer is being limited because we don't allow access to dispensaries in any kind of manageable way. So California, we concentrate 20 dispensaries in Humboldt. Then you got places like Riverside with none. So you have counties that are massive with no access, and counties where everyone grows cannabis with the most access. So like all of those things combined just create this tumultuous failure of a system. And it's unfortunate because really it's just really trying to get people back into a room to say, look, can we admit what we're doing and then look at their numbers to quantify the result?
And they don't know how to quantify any of it, right?
No, they can't, because at the end of the day, what I learned is nobody can say they made a friggin' mistake. You can't
No regulator I've seen admit mistake, right? They would rather absolve or dissolve a system like in Washington than ever admit that they were wrong, right?
Yes, and that's what we're facing now. And so what it does is it's odd, but you have legalization. You in a state, California is the best example because Christ, it's like fourth largest economy on earth. You got 40, same population of Canada, right? So I love California because without having to leave the state, I can look at such a diversity of demographics. It lets me understand populations around the world. And what you have is just purely lack of admitting that our system doesn't work. There's too much taxation and too much regulation. And because of it, you get 1/5 the tax revenue you should get. If they lightened up on the beating, they'd actually get the money they want. And I had Fiona Ma in my office. So like when you got Fiona Ma and George Runner in your office, and the two tops of California's tax board, that is the franchise tax board.
That is CDTFA.
They got 40 attorneys with them, and they're talking to you about the situation. And I'm asking them, I said, why you? And I said, how does this bit work? And they said, really, what happens is we try to figure out workable taxation because at the end of the day, we understand that the money must balance, so you can't run a business. She says the difficult part is that in our world, when we create taxation, we have to create a package that we hand to the politicians above us who then adjust it to fit their needs. And so my lack of education in politics was without question elevated quickly when I got to see how all the world works around us. And it doesn't matter what country I'm in, they're fundamentally the same approach, that the desire to control something so big and complicated is impossible for the people because they do not have that level of management. It established itself as a loose network that was connected over a century. And if you worked with it to any degree normally, you get what you wanted. You'd see lower prices, which would remove some of the illicit. If you had better oversight of the laboratories, you would constantly be trying to catch bad operators so that the patient always knew they got clean products. If you made excess easy, you wouldn't have it's hopefully in our life. Like at the end of the day, man, hopefully in our life.
All right, Leslie, as a follow-up.
Yeah. Do you think all the compliance and regulation has led to a decrease in the availability of sun-grown cannabis and an increase in indoor cultivation?
It has, but I think that what you have is, and right now it's just where we are right now. But what occurred was outdoor was once the norm, right? So when we went indoor, people didn't want to buy indoor when indoor first came out because it didn't look like outdoor. So it was a different product, right? How you identify what good is good. You're like, wait a minute, why is that small little pound? Where's my big outdoor pound? I remember when the first perps came out, like in bulk, like at the beginning of the wave, people didn't. What's that? It's purple. Within a year and a half, if it wasn't purple, it didn't sell. So when people make these changes of what's considered the high end or the norm, even it radically transforms the value of a product. And so sun grown became where we get the half from. And so the high end is the indoor. But when you get down to it, there's a bottom line you can reach with indoor price point wise, and you just can't go any lower because the infrastructure cost is so high. And so I think that right now you're in this position where indoor is dominant because it's visually been dialed into a level that's beyond comprehension. I don't know if cannabis has ever been this visually stimulating in its entirety. They've done a really good job making everything pop. And so in our world of modern people who are visually stimulated, we're phone people now, right? That's like our primary tool. That's the number one characteristic of desirability. So when I ask them, I talk to them, I'm like, I don't tell them that they should be concerned about the effect because it's not my business to tell you what you should be concerned about, right? Ultimately, I'm here to answer questions, but I'm not here to command you on what to do. And so when people tell me looks is most important to me, Kev, that makes me happiest with my herb. And then the experience is second to that. They would rather have a lower quality experience, better quality visual, because to them, through the eye is their visual stimulation. That's what makes them really hum. We've taught them since youth to look at things with the eye as your indicator of enjoyment. Like we're a digital evolution. And it blew my mind when I realized it because I said, whoa, I'm approaching this wrong. I'm telling you what you should and shouldn't like. And the truth is that I'm not qualified. I'm not of your world. So the problem is that the indoor is a visual and people are addicted to it. But what we're seeing with the evolution of genetics is that higher and higher levels of plants that can work outside in environments and become absolutely gorgeous in a way that's palatable to this new generation. And effectively, we can get the price lower because the cost of outdoor production is always less. And when you get down to it, the people who seem to win the most awards and competitions are typically these little micro sun-grown farms that have exceptionally interesting terroir. And that's just the totality of the impact where the plant exists, grower included. And they use things that really resonate in that location. And then they bring forth this really vibrant, gorgeous bouquet that allows the individual to just get sucked into it. We're losing those people because they're all being lumped into the same outdoor basket, right? So indoor has its own little cluster, but the outdoor basket is just outdoor. So bulk outdoor, exquisite outdoor, outdoor. And you can put the word craft on it all you want, but craft is the single most overused term in alcohol, right? So it means nothing to somebody. If you know that the word didn't even exist until you went into the Industrial Revolution, because why would we talk about by hand if the connotation by hand? Craft used to mean a container of alcohol, and craft is actually like a Germanic word that means strong hand. So at one time, if you had a strong hand, you had a craft. And then they figured out that a big, strong hand could hold a glass roughly this big. That became a craft of alcohol. It was a measure of alcohol, like a tablespoon or a teaspoon, but we're talking like, quart. But it was a craft. And then the next evolution of the word craft goes into by hand, because we had gone into the industrial era and we replaced the people who were weavers. And the first mills came out, wiped the weavers out. It creates the whole Luddite, the Luddite movement, where the Luddites go against the machines, and craft becomes this emotional explosion as this antithesis to the new change of technological progress. So, like, if you understand the evolution of it, right, which I did, I went and did this research on all this, how we get here. And what it made me realize is that it's no different. Every time something changes, there's an emotional blowback, and there's this adoption and clamor, and then the emotional blowback dies out after about 25 years. And so if we look at all the industrial revolutions, they're all basically in these time gaps, but now they're getting closer and closer because the speed of change is faster and faster, and you don't really see the clear distinctions between them. And the point is that where we are right now in cannabis was that indoor was something that was shown to people in magazines, which made people believe it was better because it was something that you could sell equipment to grow. So if I want to sell lights and food and things and disposables, what do I need? I need pictures of weed that it grew. And if I could put them in a magazine, and then you have an article about how awesome the pot is, and you show pictures of things that it used to grow, and then you turn the page, and the next page is the advertisement, what you have is effective marketing. So most people in cannabis got educated on cannabis from reading magazines that were effectively sales brochures. So all the advertising all these years was on indoor, because outdoor is you compost material and you recycle and you just grow in your soil. Like,
right. And even they pointed a dirty connotation towards, outdoor. Well, I can regulate. You don't have bird dung, all those different things that they tried to use to oversell. But of course, science came back and told us that, outdoor produces unique and even extinct terpene profiles that will never be produced indoors.
And I'm not anti-indoor, just to be clear.
Neither am I.
No, I'm not. I'm against no form of production. And I don't think that any one production methodology actually creates the best product, because the honest truth is, if you're doing R&D, which I've done my whole career at a level, some plants just reflect best under the environment they're in. And so some things just, if you take that exact cultivar, you don't do better if you put it out into your environment. It does better in the environment it was selected in. So but it's the propensity of the market believes that if it does this, it's that. And we're about to go through the next change. And what people don't think they understand about herb too is that if you just keep dropping the price, pretty soon it's impossible for large indoor operations to exist. Even if they're highly efficient, the cost is unbelievable to run them. So it's a tough one. It's where the money is right now, and it's where the people are. But I think that
it's also where the regulators forced certain states, right, as well, right?
Hawaii got forced into indoor originally, right? Because it's you got to take a look at the money.
Give you an understanding, Kevin. 1 gram of fresh pressed rosin in Hawaii, $94 a gram.
Insane. And if I was making the money as a farmer, I would be overjoyed, because I'd be like, oh my God, I'm getting paid well. But I know the farmer isn't making $94 at the farm. He's probably still making $6.
Right?
Yeah, and extracting through the chain is just peeling it. So I know that was a crazy down the road discussion about craft related, but if you understand where we got with indoor and why people perceive it, you'll see that it's ripe for a change as well. And mixed light is really kind of forcing that conversation. And I think true outdoor in spots all across the we'll just use the U.S. as our example. Yeah, there's tons of ultra top quality all through the United States that can be produced. Humboldt doesn't have a lock on it. We just have without question, a phenomenal environment. But I know there's a lot of other killer producers too, and super talented farmers. That's the dream. That's always been the damn dream. That you
Right.
had diversity of the species spread out amongst the country, and people who want to do in could do in, people who do mixed did mixed, people who did field crops for low quality, meaning cost products would be ideal, extract form, edible, and then you had Epicurean micro out so that you could capture the little special parts of like the sands in New York where they have really unique soil index, and just places that just shine. You know, that was like the fantasy. And in a lot of ways, I have to kind of see it out of the country to feel it, because then I can at least go, hey, this is what herb looks like in Colombia. This is what it looks like in Asia. And then now I can feel that I'm seeing material in its, not its entirety at all, but at least greater than just what I see in front of me here in the U.S. The plants express themselves different in different locations. So if you don't see it moved around, you really don't know it. You know,
right.
You're undereducated.
All right, let's get to our next question. Doc Lang, you're up.
Hi, Kevin. I think we just covered the first part of this two-part question that I have, which was in your view, what have you lost from the plant as cannabis has been industrialized? I think you just covered that. But how could you, federal or international policy, better distinguish between exempt, legal, cannabis, hemp, and medicinal cannabis products?
Well, we kind of covered what we lost in it.
Yeah.
But what this is the back season. What we didn't catch was that we lost the diversity of the cannabinoid profiles and the metabolites. So metabolites and cannabinoids all the same cluster, but we're going to call metabolites like aroma flavor. We're going to call cannabinoids cannabinoids. We lost the diversity because we moved towards COA-driven THC focus so primarily that, to me, we took away the broad spectrum of cannabis. And so what I learned from like looking at whole crop extractions, where diverse seed crops, many different plants, many different chemotypes, many different profiles, all extracted in common and put together, it gave us like the most broad spectrum usage where everybody that consumed it all seemed to be pretty happy. And I think that that's like what we missed out on, is we became so obsessed with a single cannabinoid that we chose plants that produce those pathways, but didn't need to produce any of the other ones anymore. And I don't know, you have to go basically back into older stock and try to re-engineer it and have it emerge. And I think that's a detriment to the consumer, and especially the medical consumer, because it seems like the chemistry works in synergy so much better than an isolate. And so, you know, we did some damage there. And then the question is, you know, the second part was about having a unified hemp and cannabis industry within the United States and then internationally. And I think that the primary issue that we have here is that cannabis, because of its Schedule I status, was such an unbelievable cash cow. Even like when it was illegal, it was a cash cow, but it's definitely a cash cow now too, because you get taxed on gross profit, not net. And so what happens is you have this unbelievable amount of money they make. So the government, U.S. specifically, does not want, and this is all in play too. So even with the bill and all this discussion on Schedule III, and they're going to do all this lovely shit with 280E, there's already been a bill in play for over a year through the Senate that says we want to keep 280E in play. And we never want to take marijuana off of that structure because we make too much money. And so because of the government is fighting over the dollars so heavy, it doesn't allow you to create a normalized hemp industry where you need to have like 0.1%. You have 1%. Jesus Christ. 1% cannabis THC isn't going to kill you. You need to have a number that allows you to choose a diversity of plant material. Like the issue with dictating cannabinoids and hemp is that the hemp material itself that you want to use for fiber, seed, fuel production, the varieties that are really awesome that produce the most automatically go above that number. So because we have to play this game, it never lets us be competitive internationally with our hemp crops. So we get wiped out by Hungary, we get wiped out by China, and that's not xenophobic. It's just purely, if you're trying to create a fiber crop that you're going to sell into the world, you need to allow the farmers who grow it to have access to plants that are actually competitive. But we're telling the American farmers, you got to grow this bullshit that you can't compete and sell because your plant itself has a molecule that we don't like. So we don't really have a hemp and fiber industry, and people are trying to create this hempcrete shit. But the bottom line is concrete's better than hempcrete. Hempcrete, it doesn't have the same compressive strength, right? So I'm not anti the product, but I just don't think that some of the directions we're going. At least this should be organic oil production. It should be seed production for omegas. There should be fiber to give us replacements from chemical cotton. But cotton's a big industry. The chemical companies that create chemical cotton are a big industry. So you're fighting them. So instead of having the ability to create a normalized hemp industry where you'd have fiber, you'd have seed, you'd have all the derivatives you'd make from it, they limit the individuals completely. And then when hemp figured out that they could do fractal distillation and just seal this shit down and pull out all the cannabinoids, and because they had so many thousands, hectares, they could collect and combine, it created a direct war with cannabis. So cannabis can't advertise that shit, can't sell it, you can't ship it, you're getting taxed to death, you can't get a bank account, you can't do this. Man, you get a license and in one day you had all that stuff and you could send it to people's homes. And so they went at each other aggressively as if we were in two different facts. So hemp and cannabis would smash into each other. And I always believed that cannabis would win because cannabis is taxed the heaviest. You feel me? It's like there's nothing that we are involved in. If you look at the tax rate, you'll know the policy. Like that, it really, when it dawned on me, when I realized, Doc, that was the common denominator of our situation was what makes the government the most money. It lets me easily see that's taking place because I predicted the hemp was going to come down. I said it's coming. They're creating the cases of kids being contaminated. The minute you see the word kids being contaminated, you know they're coming in. And they broke it into pieces. And so now we have an even worse situation because the plant has to be below 0.1. It's going to be below such a level that it doesn't allow you to have competitive genomics. The material itself you're using needs to have the ability to not be measured by its cannabinoid content so that you can get the best possible production. And we just straight up can't get that shit straight.
No, cannot. Maybe someday, right?
Yeah,
right.
It's a great dream.
Yeah, well, it's a pipe dream, right? We're smoking on it. All right.
Yeah, we are. I'm a burner right now.
Nate Landau has made it home, so he will join us now with his question. Councilmember Landau, you're recognized.
Hey, first of all, thank you. I had a brutal, almost 3-hour commute home, and this really got me through. My question is, how important is genetic preservation right now, and what risks do we face if legacy genetics are not protected?
It's probably more important now than maybe ever, and only because you're having an infiltration in all these native places to where the gene pools are being changed dramatically and not in a way that you would like to see. What you need to have is you have to have these populations that have existed in isolation, that have developed resistance and survivability in these specific 6 places. And they have to have, a lot of time developing and building the genetic material to have survivability. So one plant in the entire field that's male and one plant in the entire field that's female said, whoa, we have a mutation that lets us resist this pathogen. And those two breed and the plant lives again. just like people. Like when you have a plague, you have to have somebody that has something that isn't sensitive to that plague item. And they find another person, and that's how populations begin, right? So what you have is you have survivability that we really never knew how to look at because we didn't have the ability to look inside the chromosome correctly. But now we can kind of, I don't think we're very brilliant at it, but I think we have far more tools than ever. And so the idea to be able to keep some form of segregation and pureness would be optimal. And the odd thing is that, like, I think I'm involved in what I call preservation, but really it's loose preservation, and it's preservation and it's awareness making. So like I take stock from other countries and then I work it and then I release it into the public. And a lot of it's like, it's almost even like been free. What it does is it lets you get really good gene pools and it lets you have a piece of that world, even though it's no longer there. And I got the idea from coral collectors. So like when I was working as a diver, I saw all the reefs, then I saw all the destruction in the reefs. And I was like, whoa. And I didn't realize that there was all these coral enthusiasts around the world who were trading fragments, the coral segments, and that really there was this unbelievable preservation of the material in fish tanks around the world. So no, it wasn't the same exact thing. And if we looked at it over time, it would genotype the same, but it would have observable traits that were different because it had epigenetically changed to fit the environment, but we're still touching the piece. And it also creates awareness of, if you're preserving little things like this, there must be a reason. And hopefully someone who understands that takes that and follows suit. Reason being is that because cannabis is so, widespread and it's been in so many places for so long, it's developed unbelievable chemical profiles that we just really would ideally benefit from researching for human benefit. And the problem that most of these countries face, and this is the hard part, is it's the argument that I heard Brazil say to America a long time ago, and it stuck in my head. And we were telling Brazil, quit cutting the rainforest down, and they said, well, you seem to cut all your forests down when it was convenient for you. And now that you have money and you have all this stuff, you're telling us we can't cut our forests down so that we can make money. So we have to stay in this financial situation so that you can enjoy our forests since you cut all yours down. And it caught me because I realized that that's just the truth, that the need outweighs the best decision. And so in countries that are developing their modern, cannabis world, the kids don't want the native plants. Kids in Pakistan don't want to smoke hash like their grandfather did, which blows your mind. But no, they want to smoke indoor because that's what they see on IG. So the change is moving so much faster than I thought because I didn't understand the influence of the phone on the culture of cannabis and how every person on earth basically has one. So you have to be able to create, and the best way to, you have two ways, and they both kind of almost have to happen simultaneously. You have to have micro banks, and micro banks are just regional banks where people in Santa Cruz hold and share seed and they preserve it correctly. And every so many years they crack a batch and then they remake the seed. So it picks up the information from that season. So you're furthering and developing the variety to actually implement and fit into that place. And if you do it with a little group, you all kind of share the work. You're creating little micro gene banks that reflect plants that have been acclimated and developed in this region. And then you create a master bank someplace where ideally, you'd be able to say, here's a safe storage for seed. But I kind of lost faith in the master banks after watching that spot over there in Iceland, or was it Antarctica, where when they made it, they didn't anticipate the ice to melt. And so when the ice started melting, it fucking leaked and it flooded the whole facility. And all I remember is all these scientists running out of the facility holding cardboard boxes filled with priceless germplasm. And I was laughing and I said, that's like grower shit. That's something that we would do. But I didn't expect it to be at the highest level of seed preservation on earth. And I said, whoa, micro banks are probably still pretty good. And what you do is you don't just maintain the material for the material's sake. You also maintain the emotional sake. You touch that product and it lets you understand its era. All products reflect eras because people, remember, urban girl over there, what we got at certain times was because of the availability. It shaped the era. Everyone's understanding cannabis is Colombian. Everyone's understanding is Mexican brick. Everyone's understanding is Thai and Laotian. Everyone's understanding hash is Afghanistan. Then all of a sudden, everyone's understanding is indoor. And what indoor are these varieties? To me, when I look at cannabis, it's a living indicator of what occurred over its life and what the conditions were in society that created why those things sold. That's how I collect things. I collect them based off of impact over time. Why did they work for so many people? What did they do? And there's things that I like that I collect just because I like them. But the ones that I really collected heavily were things that I couldn't understand instantly why so many liked it. But I knew that if I had it in my hands long enough and I could look back, I'd be able to understand the pattern and realize, wow, people just love it. So I knew that was like Blue Dream. I'm like, man, whatever reason, people love this shit. If they're given a choice, they'll consume it. And Blue Dream is just absolutely slaying it in the market, and it's old, and people laugh at it, but it's still just absolutely slaying it in the market.
But by double numbers, even in California, which is kind of mind blowing.
Read the dispensary numbers, you're cracking up, right? But the point is that what we do is we discount those varieties and we say that has no value because I don't like it. I'm the opposite on that. I'd say if this many people are consuming it, there's inherent value. And so what we need to do is hold these things and say, hey, so many benefited from this that there must be a complexity to it that works unbelievably well. When we're smart enough, we'll study it and we'll understand why it did it on a molecular level. Right now, we just work off of what we hear from, word of mouth. But to me, you have to hold these things because if they were that desirous over a 20-year period, and I would say more like 2004, 2005, Blue Dream kind of pops into the scene. So we're talking 21 years. 21 years it's been in the scene. When it was hot as fire, and it's still red hot in the dispensary market. That is stuff that has to be held, and that's not what we would call, preservation stuff. It was a breeding done in Santa Cruz, and I don't even know who did it. Like, I don't know if anybody's ever really been clearly defined as the creator, but whoever put those two together did such a good job.
Well, the terpene profile seems to be universally accepted, and that's a unique trait in because the public really hasn't been saturated enough cannabis varietals to separate the wheat from the chaff, so to say. But what the consumer has been given due to limited market dictation, I think, is more of the fact, is that it's universally liked, which it needs to be studied in its own right. But
well, it yields too, right? So like
well, that was the thing originally, right? Was just the sheer yield made it happy for the grower to grow, right? It was a grower's, or we called that a mortgage maker, right?
Wreaked havoc in the Colorado market. That's where the Blue Dream, I looked it up, man. I tried to understand why the Blue Dream hate occurred, and I took a look, and it was really in the Midwest. Blue Dream was coming out of California with such velocity and such market demand that it was just selling the indoor market in the Rockies and then East. And they started writing all this anti-Blue Dream rhetoric. And I said, well, that's brilliant, because they organized as a collective region and said, we're going to repel the California invasion. And it kind of rippled back that Blue Dream is mid. And because it was so easy to grow, people kind of, they didn't do such a good job. But Blue Dream, when it's done to its finest level, is unreal. I gave a Blue Dream like a top 10 at the Emerald Cup, and me and Frenchie argued it out. And I said, Frenchie, it's not only me that did it. One guy can't put a plant in the top 10. We know it's Blue Dream. It was the single best Blue Dream we've ever seen. It was absolutely spectacular. So it doesn't make a difference what the name is. Herb that good that 15 judges agree is incredible. It's incredible. And Frenchie was laughing because he's like, but it's just so esoteric. And I said, I know, but it doesn't matter. It's the definition of the variety. So the preservation is critical But what the preservation does too, I think, in like the emotional sense, is it starts to, if you have to find a region you're interested in. You got to like, if new collectors could hear the lecture, I'd say, listen, find a region in the world you're interested in. Find, do you like stuff that's making? Do you like stuff that was smoking? Do you like things that are narcotic? Do you like things that are heady? And whatever you give me the answer to, we can say, okay, those regions in the world seem to focus on those profiles, those types of effects. Pick one. And in that, go dive into that. Go find material from that region, go work it, go develop it, and expose yourself to the building blocks of the things that you would be able to get today. Because fundamentally, it's all this big derivative. We got one plant somewhere in China that becomes 10,000 plants today. So it allows people to be able to, like, as a cultivator, it's nice to feel like you're part of a chain that went on forever. Like once I realized as a grower that I was just one more grower in a chain of growers that had gone back to time, it was almost like an epiphany, like a religious reaction. I'm not religious, but I had a spiritual response where, I'm on a hill and I just came out of a big diesel indoor and I'm watching this hawk fly and I'm chilling. And all of a sudden, all I could think about was being in the Kurikura Mountains, watching a hawk fly in those mountains and sitting with their friends smoking before they went back to work. And it was growing cannabis in its purest form. And I realized, whoa, I'm just another link in this chain. And when you get to touch the past in any capacity, it helps you understand the links that were there prior. And I think when people talk about cannabis culture, being able to touch it through the plant material is one of the most intimate.
I think there's also a nobility that is, and amongst, cannabis growers as well, because I took great pride that we had to grow what we had to grow, early on to, fund the clubs and get it going. But at the same time, you look to those that risked it harder, that moved the tonnage, that were our elders, that are their shoulders that we got to stand on. And you kind of sit back and go, I didn't do shit compared to some of these people, but you realize everybody has their piece in the puzzle and everybody's a unique puzzle piece in it. So
as long as you're not competing, right? Like if you and
right.
I aren't competing, which we're not, the only thing I'm highly competitive in certain things where it allows me to be able to like test myself, something measurable. Like I like endurance events, right? So I like athletics. So, but I'm not really competing against you. I know I want to beat the time. I want to beat the number. It allows me to be able to like enjoy the feeling of competition, but it's still internal. But with cannabis, I realized that if you never really saw anybody any different in the best way possible, you'd be able to suck the most information and share the most information, and you'd end up having really the best situation at the end. And so in herb, and it's hard sometimes, man, with competitive people. It's hard to be able to allow everyone to have their space and for you to be able to enjoy yours.
All right. Next up, Mike D. Oh, yeah, Mike D.
Yeah. Hey, so veterans value reliability and trust. What should patients and consumers look for to identify responsibly grown cannabis versus purely commercial product?
I think that would be more than some stores do some good jobs in curation where the store vets the people, they vet the farmer, they make sure that they buy products from people that have some knowledge of, and the customer can then depend on the storefront for that process. But I think that for many, it's really identifying the producer, and you do your best to find small batch. And small batch is the word that can be implied that it could be the biggest company in the world that says we only created a small batch of this product, right? So it's like craft, yeah. We're craft at scale. you have to be able to, if I was a consumer in a market, I would first take a look. Places like, ideally, places like Reddit are pretty simple. You go on Reddit and you take a look and say, anybody bought any product in this area? Have any farms impressed you? And you start to write down the information. You do your homework. And it doesn't take you long. And what it does, it just helps you understand what farms are in the area that sell products that you can get your hands on. And the closer the farm is to the place where you are purchasing, the easier it is for you to be able to take a look and see what are they like as a farm. I mean, you have an ability to actually do your research. And if you do so, you're able to say, hey, I like these hash makers. I got a couple people that every time I buy hash from them, I think it's incredible. And I keep track of what they do, so I know when the product they're working on is coming out because they're telling me. There's certain farms that I like to work with, and that could be indoor, mixed light, or outdoor. And it's that word of mouth in your community that creates it. But if you're not someone who's social, you just have to use the internet to help you a little bit and start to find out, you know, what, because everything's all public record, right? So none of this stuff is hidden. Everybody knows who's who now. And you know the names and you know the places, and you can start to look up and just do your research, because the amount of research it's going to take you is going to be a couple of days of digging into some stuff to get some basic ideas of who do you really want to play with. Then you play with them and you evaluate your experience. And if you're happy, you know that you started the process. And what you have an ability to do is contact the farm directly, because almost all of them have a website. And you can say to them, hey, I really like the product you made, but I'm more about these profiles. Are there other things that you can recommend? And what you're going to find is when you talk to a small farmer and they don't have what you want, they're pretty quick to tell you who does. So if you reach out to a small farmer and you're respectful of their time and you're asking an intelligent question, and usually it helps if you lead in with, I bought some of your product. That lets them know that you're okay. Why are we talking? And then they go, great. You like it. And what are you asking? You're asking me for things I don't have, but that doesn't mean you're not going to continue to buy my other stuff. So I don't have to not direct them to you so that I get the business. If I'm smart, I direct them to you. And what it does for people in cannabis, which is what people, like I say, big corporations don't understand. They don't understand that when you consume herb, it typically makes you a little nicer and a little bit more adept at looking at sneaky fits. So when you're being fair with someone that's like, hey, I don't have that. I used to do with plants. They'd be like, I need that cut. I don't have it. I said, but hang on, give me a number and I'll play that. And I would go find it because I could just pop on the phone and call the distributor and say, you got that thing? And someone would say, no, but I know where it is. And within a short period of time, I could locate it. And then I would hit the person back up and say, hey, I found it for you. And I just connected you. And so they were my customer, but I didn't have what they wanted. But that doesn't mean that I don't still assist them, because at the end of the day, is the relationship just based on the money you give me today, or is it the fact that we're trying to create an ongoing relationship? And so when you're a customer and you live in a specific area, you're going to utilize basically some close stores. And if you go into the stores and just take a look and look at the products and talk to the people and say, hey, what's the stuff that's popular and why? And you're able to ask the bud tender, and you take that information, overlay it over the top of your information, and pretty soon you have a pretty good little reference guide of what people seem to like and what they don't. And then you realize that, whoa, I'm not that common customer. I want something unique. You're able to then find someone who can produce that for you. You locate it, and now you're a happy customer. The stocks don't have the ability to create this information. They just don't have the funds to create people in the store who just talk to you. That's like the Ganjier. The Ganjier really, what it does, it empowers you to create better marketing in the store to empower the customer sales. So you give them the information on the package. You don't just give them THC numbers, but you're giving them experience packages based off of, this is what people who've consumed it have said. And here's something about the farm. So if you're interested in environmentally friendly farms, Johnny Casale's got, fish friendly, salmon safe farm, that my farm is a zero emission. I have zero sediment that leaves the farm. No water leaves the farm. No sediment leaves the entire farm. That means it's clean. The farm it's no impact. If that's important to you, then that's a selling point. But all these things you just have to kind of write down. I always tell people, man, a little notebook and a couple of good questions and a couple emails, and you'll get yourself a list of producers that you really like, and you'll get you a list of products, and you'll be able to actually have them tell you when it's coming out. And if you're nice enough and they have the ability, a lot of these farms you can go visit and come in and just take a simple tour and see the product that you're purchasing. I mean, there's nothing like going to the farmer's market and meeting the farmer who buy the cucumber from. I'm like, it helps me understand cucumbers. Like, I get smarter by being around the producer of it. So the customer, unfortunately, is disconnected from the producer to where they don't get that benefit. But the process isn't that difficult if they just understand how to go about it. All this information is public. And the dispensaries, the label's on the jar has information. Take a picture. You're going to buy the product. Take a photo of it. And say, listen, because sometimes you can't afford that product, but you can talk to the farm, you can get the understanding, you can even explain to them, I can't afford this. And a lot of times you'd say, well, listen, I know someone who produces a similar version that's cheaper, right? Like the industry in that regard on the small farm end is unbelievably humane.
Well, it's always has been, and I think it's always been led by the example of the farmer, and that's where it's always started, right? So, I mean, that respect is kind of carried forward from the farmer. So, thank you to the farmers.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to our next question. Michael Crowitz, to recognize.
Thanks, Etienne. And along that line to the cannabis farmer, in my observation over the many years, it seems like a lot of people can grow cannabis. What seems to apparently be a little bit more difficult is growing good cannabis. So let me ask this question on that vein. What are 3 suggestions that you can give to a novice home grower to greatly improve the success of their final yield?
3 things that I could give you to help you improve the success of your final yield. First of all, choose plants that are, if you're a beginning grower, choose plants that are already proven. Like, don't experiment with the plant. Find a plant that has known effects and some form of information as to what it does. So that'll help you make better decisions as it's moving forward because you'll already have information in front of you. And then understand environment. And that means that where the plant is has to work for the plant. And so that's all factors that influence it. So you need to understand the impact of how light and humidity affect the plant's transpirational system, the whole driving process. You got to do a little bit of study. You got to kind of, like, don't even look at cannabis, just look at plant science a little bit and kind of understand what a plant really needs to function, because it doesn't need you. The trees do just fine without you watering them. They don't need you. And cannabis doesn't need you either. And even though we may need cannabis, it doesn't need us in the way we want to think that we're required to grow it. It would do fine if all the conditions were applied. So if we understand that our only job is to create the conditions, it helps us understand what is a comfortable place for a plant throughout its life cycle. And if we understand how that environment changes naturally from moist and cool to hot and dry to moist and cool as it goes through this curve, you're able to understand how the plant's processes will work. And then the third, you got to understand it for quality, really how plants uptake, meaning like what do they eat and how do they eat and how do you choose a system to make it work for you, because you can get some incredible cannabis using chemical nutrition and you can't deny that. And I see some ungodly product that's phenomenal in every aspect and score unbelievably, and it's definitely chemically grown, not a single bit of exudate driven uptake. But if you're somebody who loves biologically driven cannabis, then you just got to kind of do a little research and understand what that means. And if you can do that and you do the research and you look at it from plant science perspective and then just now apply it to cannabis, what you have is this really good time because you understand what the plant needs from the bottom, you understand what the plant needs from around it, and you understand what plant you chose. And the art of completing and then drying and stabilizing and all that and storage, all those are, you know, separate entities. But to get to that phase, good plant, good environment, and good understanding of bottom end. However you choose to define it. Because like I said, they're both right. There's a million ways to grow, and I've probably grown most of them. They all can produce incredible cannabis. All methods can work if you understand how to manipulate the variables. It's just some make it inherently easier and some allow you to get more. But if you're clear of what the plant's requiring and what you're working with and what you want to achieve, you can be really flexible. So not one size fits all. And I think that's the awesomeness about cannabis, that so many of us grow very differently, but we all get some really good products. For the vast majority, I see some killer weed. More than the past. I was just in Canada. That everywhere I went, people had phenomenal grass because they've had time to learn how to use all the new tools. They've learned how to choose plants that work under these new systems. And so it's just awesome to me because it says there is no one way to do it. But no matter what you do, you're still growing a plant. And that's the part that some people seem to forget, that at the end of the day, the plant's really dictating what's taking place because if its needs aren't being met, they're not being met. And if you're meeting them too great, you're wasting too much time and money doing so, which means it's unsustainable.
All right. Mary Lynn Mathery has our next question.
All righty. Yeah, Kevin, you mentored many growers and advocates over the years. What advice would you give veterans who want to enter the cannabis space, whether as a cultivator, educator, or advocate?
Gosh, I think the best thing a veterans group could do in any capacity would be, it's tough to like, if there was equity grants that were available, that you would create cooperatives. And from that cooperative, you'd be able to invest cooperatively into a small scale vertical production model so that what you were able to do was create products and some level of income as a collective group. Because really, like, cannabis is a mess. I mean, and it really is. It's, remember, the bigger it gets, the less people are there, right? So the bigger the building, the less people are there. And it's about automation. And so what you have is very few jobs that are present and very revolving doors. So cannabis, when you say cannabis industry, holy shit, that's a maybe not the best place to go. But what's good to go is create clusters and groups that can form. And because you're veterans, you have different rights. And it should allow you to be able to bargain for specific benefits that would allow you to be able to create your own products. You could, like some cities in California, they have, like, even though it's the new world of cannabis, it's a not-for-profit model to run the operation, and you have to basically parent it under an LLC. But the point is they don't want any profits. So for me, like, that stuff's ideal for veterans because what it does ultimately is it lets the veterans take control of the production of a product. And of the people that were involved in it, they fundamentally could work within it and receive benefit and also have things to do that make you feel good. Like, having something positive in your life can't be overstated. So, you know, if you're trying to get out of, and most jobs to me in America are basically velvet sweatshop shit, where they're not the sweatshop of the past where they change you to the ankle, but they kind of want to. They just can't. And so most people are unsatisfied and unfulfilled with their jobs. And that's why you saw so many people trying to come into cannabis. And all those people that came in, cannabis basically chewed up and spit out and left them very jaded. And rightfully so. And I've had so many people that I've talked and been involved in this situation that I'm like, woo. And I used to give the same advice. Tell me what you're really good at, and you bring that into cannabis. And then if you want to be a grower, well, you go meet the grow team and you say, listen, on Sundays, can I come in for 4 hours a week? And I'm not going to get paid for it, but I get to satisfy my desire to be a grower. You don't want to come in as a grower helper. You don't want to get paid $17 an hour. You know, like, so people with college degrees that put a lot of time and effort and are highly skilled, I'm like, you're an administrative individual. Come into cannabis in the administrative end, and then meet the people, meet the teams. You'll be able to actually, once you get in the industry, you'll be able to get into different scenarios to where you can develop. But very few people would say they're happy in their job right now. What they would say is they're happy they not that they're happy at the job. And so for veterans, man, like I said, because of the fact that your group, you all have one commonality that's very powerful, and it's one of that. If you work together collaboratively, you'd be able to actually have, and in most states, you could have micro collectives that fundamentally team together to create some kind of permitting, some kind of creation, and then if you had a storefront, you could vertically sell to yourself. So if you went through the whole chain, you'd be able to have this unbelievably efficient system that served as a standalone feeding system so that nobody actually bought cannabis, right? So if you're spending, $5,000 a year on cannabis, which is not far-fetched, right? Like what we were talking, that's what, that's less than, that's $40 a month, right? That's $500 a year. So you would do $400 a month and you'd be at that range. For a lot of people that are consumers that are replacing products they use for a pharmaceutical, that is their budget. Like, it's a couple $100 they're going through because you're not getting it subsidized through insurance. And legal cannabis is expensive, so they have to value shop. That's the whole THC proposition, where you're trying to buy the most THC you can because it's really a financial decision. Because you figure that if I need a drug to give me what I need, then let me just buy more of the drug, and I'll titrate differently. I'll use less. So effectively, in their mind, they get 3 times the use out of 30% than they would at a 10%. So these are economic decisions. They're not, they were misled from where we taught, but they've had plenty of time to self-correct. And when you talk to the people in person, they're telling you, this is why I do this. So for me, if groups that, like veterans specifically, had an ability to collect themselves and create micro verticals that could feed the veteran group, they would have by far the most optimal situation. And if you were part of it and you had some participation and you received it's just like the old days. When in the old days in California, you would join these collectives, and because they gave you their $215 to grow, it allowed you to grow cannabis, and all that person expected back was a reasonable amount of cannabis every month for the use of my tag. And some people abused it. I'd say in a lot of cases, most did. But the ones that didn't, and the groups that they worked with, were phenomenal. That was Eddie Left's whole thing, where he puts that whole massive operation out and you would go buy a plant, and then you go cut the plant down and you have your plant. So you get a whole plant for $500 when an ounce was $500. And so what it did is it effectively took, the price down by, 20 times. So that kind of stuff, I think, is still possible legally if you create these closed loop systems and you create a micro storefront where it's literally a micro closet. It doesn't have to have a certain size. You just have to have a micro license, which lets you touch distribution, processing, potentially manufacturing, lets you make hash. So you'd be able to have concentrate making. You'd be able to have the ability to take the concentrate and give it to your veterans, and the veterans could take it home and fundamentally, with the recipe, decarboxylate it and make their own edibles. You could do it at home. I mean, edible creation isn't difficult when you're not trying to run a commercial kitchen. So you'd be able to actually give them the raw material in a mix and say, mix this with your eggs and your sugar and your flour and stir it up, and you have yourself your cannabis cookies. This amount, we know the amount. We know if you add it to 1 pound of material, the titration will be this. You know what I'm saying? You figure out that's what we did all the time. We simplified the process so that people didn't have to figure this out. We'd say, listen, this much into this much gives you this much. And we knew because we made it and had the lab test it. And once the lab tests it and tells me the number, I'm like, okay, when you take this brownie sheet and you flatten it out, the total cannabinoids will be this within it. And so if you cut them up, that'll be basically your doses. You just have to be able to provide the information and the simplicity so that people who are already struggling with life issues don't have to struggle with that shit too. Like, does everything have to be hard? And I laugh too, because I'm like, look, walking uphill with bare feet in the glass is like, it's doable, but is it necessary all the time? And so for me, if there was any way that you could get groups together that could take a look at the concept and idea of creating micro verticals and offset it by, there's 20 of us, we consume this much cannabis a year. That means that if we were to do this, we would save ourselves $40,000 a year the first year, and we would save ourselves $80,000 the second year because we didn't have to buy the infrastructure. And now we only have $20,000 reoccurring costs. That's an intelligent decision. Like, you're using it as medicine. It's part of your life. It's kind of like you're going to buy food too. If you could work with similar, food co-ops, it's the same idea where you're like, listen, we're all going to buy 3 cows and we're going to butcher them because Dina's not a butcher, and we're all going to grow them in your yard, and I'm going to provide the grain. And when we do the cut and the hang, we all end up getting a cow, and it costs us this much, and we save this much. There's no difference, right? Really, it's really about collaboration to get people together as a cluster. That's the problem to me, is that veterans are struggling emotionally and physically from the fact that you got involved in this really heinous shit and didn't get any kind of support, and you were isolated. You don't have clusters of people and then people that have less impact, that can stay stable through difficult times, so that as you're struggling with your life and trying to figure it out, you're not excluded from the community. Like when people, it's a lot of people aren't used to people having really heavy issues, and they don't catch that the sin is that when they have that issue, it undoes years of forward progress. And in terms of like support systems, which is what cannabis is to me, so it's a life raft. And oddly enough, the shit I did in the military was I used to teach like survival at sea. Right? So like, if we go over in a ship, I guarantee I'm coming out of that wreck, and I'm gonna really do my best to get you and a couple other people with me. And we're gonna work it out, and we're gonna do so because that's the plan. And that's what you have to be able to do, is create a structure where there's somebody who can pull the project a little, but isn't trying to run it and dictate the constraints to the participants. That lends itself to abuse. It's
Right.
tough.
No, it's very tough. That's, we don't ask light questions. We're not asking for light answers. You know what I'm saying? That's, we used to say, when you're in the shit, you're in the shit, right? So that's the thing, is most people don't realize they're in the shit, and they're in the shit with us. All right, let's get to our last question. Leslie, council member, you're recognized.
Yeah, thanks. Kevin, looking ahead 5 or 10 years, what gives you hope about the future of cannabis, and what worries you if policy continues on its current path?
That's a great question. I just gave this lecture in Canada, right? I love this topic because it's so wild due to the fact that we're at this precipice of technological pressure that we've never had prior. And what I think that's going to be incredible is I believe that if we just had a beautiful open road in front of us, with what's going to happen with technology is we'll start to really better understand ourselves as human beings in terms of how our body's stimulated through the endocannabinoid system really effectively. And we'll be able to start with the ability to look at plants in a level we've never seen. So this is the first time ever in history that we've had enough plant database reference material to make comparative analysis with the AI we needed to interpret the data. So the information's been there, but the AI hasn't been there. So all these years of compiling, finally you have the computer power to look at this quantity of data and see the patterns. And what we're going to be able to find, I think, is really tailored cannabinoid applications. And I think that it would be wonderful for people to be able to, because it would be clustered. You'd have clusters just like we do with all things. It'd be A positive, A minus, B positive, O positive, it's like blood type. What we would be able to have, to me, is these clusters where you'd start to see varieties that were created that stimulated that individual, that cluster of individuals. And so when we smoke, we would be smoking the optimum herb to satisfy our systems. And like, that's the peak of holistic medicine. And it won't just be cannabis, it'll be all these different plant-based medicines where we'll start to really understand how do we utilize them correctly, because so much of that information that I think we knew 1,000 years ago intuitively was removed. We basically got rid of, and I'm not a plant healer. I mean, cannabis is where I put my focus in, but in general, all plant medicine has been basically pushed down because it's a direct competitor to prescribed medicine. And even though most of prescribed medicine is really analogs and derivatives of plant-based medicine, it creates a conundrum because we don't know how to use the products that people use for thousands of years. And I get in lectures with people and they're like, they just use it. I'm like, indiscriminately. I said, so human beings are just indiscriminately doing things for 1,000 years in a row indiscriminately because they somehow only gain the ability to be thoughtful now. So we're all descended from idiots, but we're geniuses. I was like, I don't think it works like that. I think that people understood how to use the tools. They just didn't have the science to understand. And I really think that the ability to look at the human being and look at the cannabis plant and understand better how to put the two together will create a relationship that people need. I think that you would be able to find what's right for you and where do you find it and how do you get it. And I think all those processes will be streamlined. I think that you'll see an improvement in crop quality. And I think that the every single one of these things I'm talking about is the inverse to really the negative, because it almost doesn't involve us as operators. It's the fact that we're using, high resolution photography with AI reading to look at all seed stock now, and it lets us see, is it viable? Is it male or female? And give me some of the traits that are going to come from it strictly from the exterior of the seed. So you're able to do things that we've never been able to do. You're able to create a roboticized, AI-driven agricultural model that is already in play in every other field and in every aspect of our world around us currently. And I work in some of these things, so I'm aware of where we are with what we're doing. And I realize that so much of what people want is really automated agriculture. And that's terrifying to me because, like, nobody wants to be replaced by a robot. And we can say, well, we have this inherent value, but we're talking nobody can predict more than 5 years with technology, because we figure 5 years we'll have some really, really high level intellects that are easily available to access. And all of a sudden it'll give you a 400 IQ in your pocket to talk to. And I don't think anybody's talked to somebody with a 400 IQ before. And so that means it's unpredictable, right? So if we're trying to understand what this is going to do, we're not smart enough to predict it because it's too smart for us to understand what it can do. So to me, with as much work as I'm doing in these type of things agriculturally, we're using it for breeding work, you're using it for doing, all understanding of how all these things work together. I'm like hyper fascinated because I think the consumer is going to benefit tremendously. And I think that eventually cannabis would shift into basically that in your science world, and then micro home cultivation. Because at some point normality will take place and people would be able to grow some cannabis. They'd be able to treat it like heirloom tomatoes. It would become something that was normalized again, like it once was in times past, because the field of commercial cannabis production would become highly specialized. And we're going to age out my generation, right? So I smoke my weed. That's nice. Kids today don't like to smoke. They also like to drink. They don't even have sex. The kids of today are stressed out and are tricky. They spend 30% of their income on health and wellness, first time in history, human history. No one's ever spent that much money on health and wellness because they're so terrified the world around them is so brutal that they are hyper focusing on the inverse of it. So we have this group of people who are coming in who do not have a romantic vision of cannabis. What they see is entitled people who made too much money and bought houses and had good lives they can't afford now. And they're pissed off. So they're not gonna like get all swept up in the romanticism of this era that we had. They're gonna want something for them. And I believe that that's not a bad thing. It's that if we serve it to them correctly, then we still stay alive because we're serving it to them correctly. And we're not trying to dictate their terms. We're saying, hey, in our generation, this is how we did it. In your generation, this is how you do it. And I'm not telling you you're wrong, and I'm not saying I'm right. And what it does, it allows us both to appreciate cannabis from both ends. So the people that are coming can appreciate it from their delivery system, their methodologies, their knowledge, and those of us that had this relationship from the past, we can help drive it forward by being supportive of cannabis in general and how we deal with people. Like for me right now, I don't think people in cannabis not treat each other very well. If you get on any forum, man, it's almost a cartoon. Sometimes I just read that shit just to see how petty people can be because it's comedic. That needs to end at some point because it's the fights between who's valid. And when you're fighting over who's valid and who's smartest and who's bad, all this other crap, nobody benefits. And the customer by sure is not getting any benefit. And at the end of the day, the customer to me is just the user. So for me, when I consume, I just want someone who's done a good job, tried hard to give me a good product, right? That's my expectation. And if they're using a robot to help them water, I'm not mad at them. And if they use a robot to tell them when the plant's ripe, because that's what Brix is, right? It's all about sugar. We use technology constantly to give these indicators, right? Yeah. So the bottom line is, like, it's just a progression. It's just that we don't like the new tools, but those tools will change everything we do in cannabis, both positively, which I'm ecstatic about, and negatively, which I'm scared.
Oh, yeah.
Because what do we got?
Yeah,
you don't need people at the counter.
I mean, Cornell this week put out a video on the use of drones in the fields, right?
Drones are great, but for putting predators out. They use them in California for flying all your insects out. Oh, they're great.
Yeah, I mean, technology is to be used as a tool, right? Use your tools. Well, Kevin, you have done more. Yeah, thank you so much. You have done more than answer our questions, as well as took us down a very fascinating journey that is yeah, Ganjier Zero yourself. You are you're needless to say a inspiration to us, as well as you hold great respect in our eyes. And so, as a veteran, you're more than welcome to join us anytime. That's our only due. We have no dues. We have no hierarchy. We have no headquarters. All we ask is show up. So, that's what we are, is a bunch of people who care. And yeah, we're getting ready to head back to the UN in a couple of months to continue the working on our high level stuff that will affect the world. As Michael and Em have changed medical cannabis worldwide, we're working on the goal of stopping executions for cannabis by 2030. So hopefully that will be realized, because nobody should be dying from a plant. But at the same time, that's a reality that is ongoing today, still in this world. So I can't thank you enough for taking the time and so much of your evening with us to answer all our questions. So I want to thank you. I want to thank our guests, Michael Davis, Michael Crowett, Doc Lang, Leslie Fries, Marilyn Mathery, and Nate Landau. And How do people find Kevin Jodrey? How do people find any information if they want to learn more on you? What's your social? What's your details?
Kevin Jodrey. Kevin Jodrey on IG. Kevin Jodrey in LinkedIn, and just Google me. Kevin Jodrey there too. I'm up in Humboldt, so if you're in Humboldt, hit me up, man. Come check me out. I travel a little bit internationally, doing some work outside the country, so it's kind of nice to meet people from the places we go to as well. But really, I'm pretty blue collar. You know, I'm blue collar, man. I'm from a fishing village in New England. You know, so it's I don't really do a lot of promotion, but I'm pretty easy to reach. Really, I'm not hard to find, and I'm grateful that you let me have the opportunity to be on your show and hang out with the crew of you, because it's odd to be it's odd to be a veteran, and because you understand service in a different way, and people don't understand that you can love your country and disagree with it simultaneously. That it's I'm like, okay, you're a refugee, you might not want to be. And so to me, veterans that went through these campaigns prior, post my time in, really had a rough time. And so any information that I can provide in any way that's positive or helpful, just feel free to ask.
You're a blessing to us, and we appreciate you greatly. All right, well, that will wrap up our evening, and I want to thank everybody for joining us. This has been our VAC Roundtable number 97. All righty, and that.
Thank you.